I'll give you a call on Facebook just to wrap up. I don't like such a cold drop.
Yeah,
Like we're
yeah.
growing and then get out. Welcome, my dear friends. It's great to see you. Welcome to the show. In case we haven't been introduced before, I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an appreciator of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. And sometimes I show videos of adorable fuzzy creatures or slick predatory reptilian creatures, depending on what I've been doing. And closer to the fuzzy adorable category, but also speaking to interesting people, this episode, we've got a heck of an interview with Casey Christofferson. Because Casey is a game designer, an art director, an artist himself, and he's into wrangling the most dangerous creatures out there, high school students, because he's also an art teacher. Now, I first met Casey at North Texas Role-Playing Game Convention, as I have with many of the guests that I've had on the show. In the first year I met Casey, I was in 2 of his sessions, and both of them showed that he was clearly really good at traumatizing his players, and trauma creates memory. And this is also how my DM style feels, so I wanted to know more about this guy. And in subsequent years at the con, we've talked more and found even more things that we're into, like hard liquor, movies, and more. And so in this interview, you're going to get a lot of topics covered. Yeah, we're going to talk about role-playing games. Yeah, we're going to talk about movies, but we're going to do quite a talk about Scotch and give some great hints on what to pick up there. I've already tried one of his recommendations. Oh, that's lovely. We're going to talk about how the kids are doing in society. And we're going to talk a heck of a lot about art because it's something I'm interested in, and obviously he is too. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as we did. My dear friends, let's welcome to the show another dear friend, Casey Christofferson. Now, I first met this guy at the North Texas Role-Playing Game Convention, and I had such a wildly entertaining time gaming with this guy and just chit-chat with him over the years that I wanted to talk more to him and learn more about this dude because there's way more to him than just making role-playing games. And I knew if I thought it'd be interesting, I figured y'all would find it interesting too. So, Casey, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, before we go down the rabbit holes that I warned you I wanted to explore, in the description below this video, I've posted 3 other interviews with Casey, and I recommend that people watch those because they explore different topics, and what we're going to explore today, rather than waste Casey's time by asking him the same questions over and over again, we're going to ask him new questions, but those other interviews are really good, so I would highly recommend those to you. Since I already mentioned that you make role-playing games, let's go ahead and get that out of the way before we get to all that other stuff you got going on. You started professional game work in 2002, and since then you've worked for, I've got the list here that you helped me complete.
Actually, I think I started in like 2001, maybe even. Yeah, I've been in it for a while, but go ahead.
I got you. The internet
Yeah,
lied to me. It said
yeah,
2002, but
yeah. Long time, man.
yeah, does it feel like a long time?
Sometimes it does. When people start asking me about things I wrote a long time ago, I have to kind of roll the wheels back a little bit and go, oh, or we'll get for different companies I work for, I'll get an email every once in a while. Well, what did you mean by the distaff Duke of such and such, whatever? And I'm like, I just made it up. It was just some filler things. Bob Bloodsaw, I had a conversation with him when he was still around. He's the creator of the Judges Guild, of course. We were working on Judges Guild, Wilderlands of High Fantasy with him many years ago, over 20 years ago, to release it as a big box set because it's one of Bill Webb's favorite things in the world at the time. I was asking him a question one day. I was trying to get a real feel because we were trying to do every hex on the map. You know, I mean, that was the original ambition. That's a lot of hexes. I asked him, and I'd found one where there was a knight, and he's, you know, his hair, his beard's grown, he's like got weeds growing on him, and you know, he's just been standing here for decades in this one particular spot because a passing princess had come by and saw a rose growing wild in the thing and commanded one of her knights to guard that with his life, and he's been standing there as a hermit guarding that rose ever since. And I was like, just the idea that that's such a deep thing for an encounter, such a, you know, you have people and they don't understand hex crawls whatsoever. They'll just roll a bunch of random numbers as you go hex to hex or whatever, and it's like, that's not it. That's not it. There's something weird and unique, ominous, mysterious, joyful, playful, terrifying that you encounter along the way, and you don't know what's beyond the next horizon. A lot of medieval fantasy RPGs are based on stories that came from Ireland and England. You look at Scotland, you look at those places, not very big. They're not
No.
very big, but the people in those days never passed to the next valley, never went to the next moor, never crossed through the entirety of their own forest because their whole life was lived within a 3 to 5 mile radius of where they were born. That's just kind of a thing that stuck with me. So when I create stuff, a lot of times I will throw out those like little weird things that it's just a thread that you could tug on and turn that into a whole campaign, a whole adventure. You could make it about some character's particular life and help them build in their backstory, just by paying attention to detail. It's one of the things I really strive for myself. I really push it on my art students. Attention to detail is the thing that's going to get people coming back to look at your artwork over and over again.
And little strange things that surprise and delight. Like what you just talked about right there with that
Yeah.
one example about the knight still standing there. That's intriguing. You want to know what that story is.
Yeah.
How's he stayed alive? What's going on? Is the princess still alive? I don't know. Is she in trouble? Is there something special about these roses? All those story hooks just drop right down
Everything. It's right there. It's right
once you're
there.
presented with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I said, when I get those emails or whatever, what's this? And I'm like, so I'll crank out a paragraph or whatever and make something up, if I
Do you
can't
ever
remember.
use
Yeah.
Gary Gygax's line of, well, what do you think it is? That sounds good to me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's I do miss that man. He was such a great resource for a lot of up and coming writers and developers over the years. You send the age of email, you send him an email, he responded. And he responded in detail, and he must have answered 300-400 emails a day. Yeah, and he took he'd spend kind of an hour of his day answering the emails and shooting it back to you. If he knew you, that was a great resource. You'd say, well, what about this? And he'd go, oh yeah. Well, and then he'd add some things that you hadn't thought of, and just put them in. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, since you mentioned him, that reminds me of when I talked to Chris Clark about Gary Gygax because
Mhm.
he's very vocal about, we were buds. And when they got to start working on Castle Wolf Moon, when it was just an idea in Chris's head and he wanted to get Gary's feedback on it, and he sent I think like 70,000 word manuscript over to Gary, and it came back in less than a week with an extra 100,000 words or something like that. Some ridiculous amount of verbiage getting tossed down. And then, did you work with Gary?
Yeah, I helped when we were doing the Castles and Crusades. I helped playtest a lot of the rules. I worked actually more with the late great Jim Ward with things on Castle Keeper's Guide while they were doing that. But I would say that I worked with a lot of the people who were working with him at the time. We checked each other's work, we checked each other's manuscripts. So yes. Uh, was I part of the directly working on the Castle Zadig and things like that? No, because this isn't a weird brag or anything, but I was working on big, big books and big, big projects for both Troll Lords and Frog Guide, well, Necromancer games at the time. I was working on City of Brass, I was working on Bard's Gate, I was working on mass combat rules that ended up, some of them got folded into the Castle Keeper's Guide. I was pretty busy, and it was a lot of the other people who hadn't already had a book out or were just they were coming on the scene around the same time I was, Jeff Talanian and guys like that. And some of these dudes, they're just not around anymore, and but others of us have been here for 22, 25 years, whatever it's been. And so yeah, I worked with those guys. I was approached, I gave them input, same kind of thing.
So, did you ever get to see one of those manuscript revision dumps from Gary where it went from
Yeah.
20,000 words to 150,000 words? And I'm just curious how much of that output that he added needed
Well,
a whole lot of work, or did it show up pretty
from what
close
I
to ready?
understand is that he would get up fairly early in the morning, and he would start writing and composing and answering emails and that sort of thing. And he would do that until like lunch. Then if anybody came by the house, and he would work, but you could also tell when he was starting to tire out as the day was going on. Because, it was kind of like it would be like a whole lot of really, really good stuff, and then it'd be kind of some medium stuff, and then it'd be kind of a mess. If people showed up at the house, which oftentimes they did, he'd just sit down and throw a game for 3 or 4 hours, whatever, until he felt like going to take a nap or what have you. And then he'd get up and he would edit the stuff that he worked on in the morning before he went to bed and get up and he had a pretty good work ethic. I mean, he was putting in 10, 12-hour days just like everybody else, way, way, way into his life.
Wow.
So,
That's
yeah.
really cool, man. And so, all right, we got Necromancer Games, now Frog
Yeah.
God Games, Troll Lord Games, you mentioned Goodman Games, Kinzer and Company, 77
Yeah.
Worlds, Planet X Games, Pulp Comic Games, Gamehole Con Games, Ominous Glow. Do they also
Yeah.
have games at the end of it, or is it just Ominous Glow?
I don't know if they're going with games yet. I think so, but they're really new. It's a couple guys that approached me. Keith Hershey's one of them, and Arvin Donner, another one. Arvin actually came out to North Texas this year and got to play in one of my games. They first approached me about doing some writing, but I, for one, had some bad writer's block. For two, I had other obligations I had to finish before I take anybody else's writing gigs. But I have time to do art all the time. My day job is I teach, oddly enough, gaming concepts and art, illustration, and design. So gaming concepts is aligned with esports because esports is paying out more scholarships right now than the entire NCAA, is what I've been told. Yeah, that seems pretty shocking, but if you look who's behind esports, that's NVIDIA, Microsoft, Intel,
People with
Amazon
money.
Game Pass. So yeah, you get where I'm going. Sony, all the big names in tech are sponsoring teams. We have some big fans of our RPGs that are in the tech field, and they own some fairly substantial peripheral companies, right? And they put a lot of money into esports. So the esports scholarships are a real deal. Not to mention the fact that, we have, and recently we've had a high school kid, he's getting paid to train other people.
And he's still in high
And
school.
yeah, he's either graduating this year or he just graduated. I can't remember which. He's a great kid, and he's been recruited by a lot of the pro league players since he was like 15, 16 years old. So
Wow.
the problem with the current esports thing is that the leagues will just suddenly collapse, right? Or they'll say that the leagues aren't kind of like in the old days of NBA basketball, in the old days of football, you'd have a football league pop up and, crash and burn, or some other upstart league starts out, gets folded into the main thing, that sort of deal. So they're experiencing growing pains like that right now. There's also people who feel there isn't real competition because not everyone always ends up playing on the world level, on the world stage, right? So you have tons and tons of teams in Asia that don't necessarily ever compete against the ones in the States or the ones in Europe and South America and so on and so forth. But it's a whole thing. So that's and they got me into it because part of I design games, I develop games, I've been working in games, and role-playing games, pen and paper role-playing games are the foundation of every video game, hands down. It's a big thing for me to be able to be part of that. And it's kind of like, how weights is to football or how your health class is to gym class, right? Teaching you how to do CPR, teaching you how to be, say, a clean individual, right? Body sanitation and cleanliness and that kind of thing. And so we go over that stuff in class, things like how to comport yourself online without being a bigot or a piece of crap, how to watch your language so that you don't cost your team points. And I'll use Travis Kelce as an example because we live in the Wichita area, and he's Kansas City Chiefs. This is Chiefs Kingdom over here, and I say, hey, you remember before Patrick Mahomes played when Travis Kelce cost his team 150 yards worth of penalties every game? And they're like, what do you mean? I said, because he threw temper tantrums and he had a fit and he wasn't a good teammate. And his brother made fun of him publicly until he started getting his head right. Don't be one of those guys when you're at an esports event, because if you cost your team points, they're not going to like you anymore.
So you're
Just basic.
saying public ridicule and shame can correct bad behavior
Hey,
sometimes.
we
It
can
does.
infer whatever we want, but at the end of the day, being critiqued by your peers for your performance and your behavior is one of the biggest motivators to being better.
Wow, I totally wasn't expecting to hear any of that. And that's what I'm talking about. This guy's interesting. See, like I have this list of questions and I know stuff he's into. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't at all. That's really neat and that's good. And what you were talking about reminded me of some of the things I've heard Lawrence Schick talk about
Mhm.
because I've been watching some of his interviews and how what role-playing game designers and this kind of systems, the thought processes that y'all have come up with feeds so strongly into the modern gaming scene and has for decades.
Yeah, yeah. I was blessed about 12 years ago to be able to interview him for exactly the same kind of thing. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was like, hey, I teach this kind of stuff in school and I do this kind of thing. And he gave me like 15, 20 minutes of his time at North Texas at the old location.
What
So that
was
was
the
really
old
neat.
location? Because I've
Yeah,
only ever known the Weston.
it was a Hyatt. It just got too small for the convention. And the guys who run North Texas, they don't like to have a big convention. They want a more small, intimate kind of situation. So what do they sell, like 500 tickets?
That's what
But
they
then
capped it at. Yeah.
and then, it's open up to the public, whatever, whoever shows up for day passes, but the core is like the 500 people. And I'd say that's nice because you do get to meet all of the folks who are your developers and designers. And I would say also that the players that you encounter at North Texas, probably even more so than Gary Con, not necessarily Gamehole Con, but every one of them's a pro player. I mean, everybody who's there has been playing for their entire life. There's all of the children and the young people there were brought there oftentimes as kids, and now they're creating and developing their own stuff for their peer groups. Pretty wild. It's always been a very friendly, very open place, despite all of the whatever you read internet stuff and all of that griping and complaining you hear there, this, that, and the other thing. Bottom line, that game convention is all about games. It's all about people who love games, and it's all about playing the games and having fun. And that's what Doug Ray wanted when he invented it, and much respect for that man. He did a lot of great things for this community for
He
sure. So
made
he
a
was
hell of a
nice.
con.
Yes, he
And
did.
you talk about the quality of players that you can find. Just one little play
Mhm.
test that I was in for Chris Holmes. He's got a board game that was a heck of a lot of fun. So you got Chris Holmes, son of John Eric Holmes. And then you got at the table one of the DMs that I most respect there as one of the regular players. Of course, myself, and I'm amazing. But then the last player, he is, I guess, pseudo professional playtester for Wizards of the Coast and has been doing it for over 10 years. So there is a lot of brain power at that
Oh yeah.
table.
Oh
And
yeah.
Chris was looking for different ways of doing it. And he had a great audience to get that feedback from.
Yeah.
And he
Oh
was
yeah.
loving it. And we had a great time. So you ain't kidding at all. If
Yeah.
anybody's interested in game design, get your butt to
Right.
North Texas.
And I always make sure I've got kind of a reputation as a killer DM, and it is what it is. But the bottom line is I let people do whatever they want. I mean, if they challenge me on a rule or whatever, unless I'm pretty sure, like 99.9% sure I'm right, I'm like, hey man, it's your game. I don't mind. I'm just here to see what happens. We had a guy, he's like, that's not how that works. I'm like, okay, man, we'll do it your way. It's not a big deal. If I take a pause to think about it, it's not because I'm angry, it's because I'm thinking what's the next step going to be, because it's I was running a play test this year for the one I wrote for a pulp comic, which is Power of All Seeing Eyes, and that one's going to be wild. It's kind of like, how did I describe it? It's kind of like a Tomb of Horrors. I don't really want to say that because it's more of the Tomb of the Invisible All-Seeing Eye kind of deal. So there's a supernatural gangster who runs these gangs in the Forbidden North. He runs most of the real sleazy parts of the major city setting, and it's an optional adventure for at some point the characters are gonna get sick of his nonsense when they're high enough level and track him down to his lair. And so you're facing like an ultimate crime boss, kind of a Jabba the Hutt villain in his own lair. So that's a challenge to even get to the lair in the first place. I thought they were going to TPK themselves before we even got into the tower, but then, players being smart and we're playing old school essentials, which, the rules are different. And I'm from the old school, so I don't mind massive character casualties if that's the kind of game we're playing. If you don't mind massive character casualties and that's the kind of game we're playing, because I got more character sheets. We'll just hand you something else. I'm gonna keep you in the game. And so they turned a character into a golden dragon because they had polymorph, and that made this character who was relatively weak, slow, and kind of worthless into basically a god for a little while. And so that had me thinking, okay, all right, this is the kind of game it's going to be. Let's go. It didn't save his life one bit because, if you're playing old school rules, you also have bouncing lightning bolts. And if they got to make that save 3 times, it's going to be harder each time to make it. So, oopsie
Yeah.
daisy. But
Well, see, my experience with you from those two games wasn't that you were a killer DM, but the opportunity for us to get ourselves TPK'd,
oh,
it
yeah,
was right there. If we
it's
wanted
always
it, we
there.
just had to reach out and touch it. You'd be like, "Here you go," and then point and laugh. No, it was awesome. Very
Yeah.
the atmosphere that you generate in your descriptions and in just your delivery of certain lines of text or a little bit of dialogue. It was very effective.
Yeah.
But I believe you talked to that in an interview you did with Matt Finch. So I won't go too much further down that, but people check that out. It was a great interview. So you got all this stuff going on. And for those companies, were you mostly doing freelance work? Were you full-time employee? What the
Okay,
drive?
currently they made me a part owner of Frog God Games, Necromancer Games a few years ago. So it was kind of like I've been with, speaking of Frog God Games, that's the little ding right there was our team's message popping up
Mhm.
there. So I'm a part owner with Frog God Necromancer Games. I lean more towards the Necromancer Games stuff myself because that's where I started and that's where a lot of the lore that I've been working on for the course of my career exists. Though it is part of the Lost Lands, which is published by Frog God, all of that. It was a branding thing. People are confused by it, and I get it, but it's okay. We've been around a long time. We've got a ton of product. It's a lot of very deep lore, but it's easy to pick up. I like that. So, but with most of the rest of them, I've been some form of slightly more than a freelancer, but a little less than a full-time employee. It's never been a go check in at an office kind of situation for me. I've always done this work from home. A lot of stuff that Bill Webb and I worked on 20 some years ago was I'm typing furiously while he's typing furiously, and we're both on the phone to the point where he tells a story where his wife they were engaged dating at the time, and she was about to break up with him because he was spending too much time on the phone with Casey, who she didn't know was a dude who sounds like me. So yeah, 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 yeah. And yeah, it's like, who's this Casey you're talking to all the time? Oh, it's this guy I'm doing work with. And once she figured that out, everything was cool.
Who's
But
this blonde with long hair that you
yeah,
keep
yeah, it's
calling?
long-haired blonde. It's yeah, yeah. And my hair was even longer and blonder back then. So yeah, it is what it. But yeah, it's a lot of freelance stuff. I mean, I consider the Troll Lords family. Literally, they're my kin. I would do anything for those guys in a heartbeat. If Steve calls me up and says, "Hey, man, give me 10,000 words by next weekend," I'm gonna try and make time to make him 10,000 words just because I owe him that much. He's done a lot for my career. He's done a lot for me in times when the money was tight and my daughter was little and I needed to make $500 to make a bill or pay for a birthday or some kind of thing like that. And so I would type up the words and get the check, and that was important. And it wasn't that I was ever writing anything that was just for the money because I won't give anybody anything that I don't feel 100% on, but it was the opportunity to make that money when there might not have been a chance to do that. The other guys, 77 Worlds, Jim Ward, he came to me with that and was like, "Hey, I'm doing this stuff." I would hook him up with things, and he would hook me up with things for a good period of time after we worked on Castle Keeper's Guide stuff. So I met him in person for the first time at a North Texas, I think, and also at the Troll Con. So I can't remember which one we really kind of hit it off at. I think it was one of the original Troll Cons in Little Rock. I would sit and draw pictures while he was dungeon mastering, and he'd kind of look over at my artwork, and he's like, "That's pretty good." And I says, "Yeah, well, you had a chance to hire me when you were the publisher at Dragon." He goes, "Hold on, when was that?" And he's like, "Remember, there wasn't any internet." And so he's like, yeah, he basically threw the art director under the bus, said the art director was related to somebody who he worked for, and he didn't have any choice, and he didn't like the guy either. So, fair enough. But he compared my stuff to the expression that I put into the work, similar to like what his good buddy Holloway did. Whereas it's just there's so much expression and life and character and stuff to all of the even the background figures are up to something, especially in those like drawings he did of like the big orc and dwarf wars. So yeah, that was a good compliment. It kind of re-inspired me to start working on some stuff, some artwork for fantasy games, because I'd kind of gone a different direction for quite a while.
And being compared to Jim Holloway, that's a bit of an honor
Pretty
because that
nice.
dude's
Yeah, yeah,
he
it's
was
pretty
solid.
nice.
And it's
Yeah.
kind of I struggle with the description of what his look is like because it's pretty distinctive.
Mhm.
And I'd like to hear what yours is, but the best I can word it is it's almost cartoon-like, but with substance. There's a
Yeah,
seriousness to it,
his
a weight.
yeah, it reminds me of a lot of the stuff like the artist that Archie Goodwin would hire for like his books, like your Blazing Combat, and then he had like his cowboy books that he did. And I think he was either the writer or publisher or of these guys right here
Oh,
back in the
that's
day, the
hot.
creepy magazines. And I picked these up because they're collections of all of these stories from back in the day. And then, they're bound with like the individual covers on the inside of them. And
Yeah.
they're all like, great Frazetta covers, which you can't go wrong there.
Mm.
Uh, that's kind of where his thing reminds me a little bit of. It's that kind of classic 60s, 70s comics. So it's the Silver Age kind of comic style a little bit. But he also had that, he really put in the effort to do research on what armor looked like and how it was put together. And so you look at all of his like brigantine and banded armor and all of this kind of stuff, chainmail. And I used to draw tons and tons and tons of chainmail. And man, he put in work. Let's just say that he put in there's an amount of time for each one of those rings that gets drawn on just the sleeve with some throwaway work in the background.
So it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but a common element of working with
Mm.
each of these companies, each of these people, has been very much a spirit of cooperation and collaboration, like
Sure.
real warm networking kind
Yeah.
of situation.
Yeah,
That's great.
absolutely. Yeah, you try to be, you try to be. You always get situations where you're gonna have egos get in the way, or you have situations where feelings get hurt because you don't understand what the critique or criticism is about a thing that you did or didn't do, or you're always gonna have creative differences when you got a bunch of creative people in the room. But like I said, that kind of goes into the whole idea of differences in the companies. When I did a dungeon crawl class, then I wrote an article about creating great villains for games for Goodman. Those were for fun. He had like a treasure map thing that he'd done, and we'd already done a treasure map thing with Necromancer, so I was down to do another one. So I had a cool underwater Sahuagin, Sahujin, depending upon how you say it, what side of the island you come from.
They're
Uh,
nasty, hateful merfolk. Okay, that's
Yeah,
all
yeah,
you
yeah.
really
Sea
need to know.
Devils. So I had my own Sea Devil thing, and it was kind of cool when Alex Kammer did his Sea King's Malice for Frog God, seeing the things that he did that were like similar to the problems that I had solved, but also ways that he had come up with that were completely different from the way that I did mine. And he turned his into like a 125-page book, and mine was like, I don't know, 18, 24-page dungeon crawl. He really expanded that and really developed that whole thing and made it into a real useful, usable campaign with lots of extra materials in that book that you can use for just about anything. So I really like that one a lot. In
Good
fact, I
deal.
used it in one of the campaigns I was running when I was running City of Brass for my home campaign. They got into a deal. There's a aboleth in the lower city. It'll hire you to do a deal for it, and but that's vague. It could be any kind of deal. So it's like Game Master's choice. Well, if it's Game Master's choice, I'm going to my shelf and I'm picking up one of the books that we put together with our art department and our writers and our editors and our staff, and I'm gonna check the level requirement. If it matches the guys, I'm going to slap it down because why go write something new when I've already got it right over there, and it's done by a guy who's an expert. So
Yeah. So it sounds like it actually is fun to work at a game company, like
yeah,
most
yeah,
of the
yeah.
time.
I mean, for the most part, it can be fun. There's downsides when you get a bad review, or your funding period doesn't hit the numbers that you wish it would have, or whatever. I mean, those can be kind of a bummer, kind of a gut check. Like, man, we really put in a lot of work, a lot of blood, sweat, tears, hours, time away from family to put this thing together. And well, what's the deal? Why didn't it do what it did? So you second guess yourself, and I mean, you got to deal with that. But that's going to be no matter what you do in a creative field. You get rock bands put out a new record every 3 to 6 years, and they're really hoping for a big hit to keep them back on the radio again. And they may go a long time without having another hit, or they may never have another one again.
And that's a conundrum, right? Because you want people to like your stuff, but you also want to write stuff and paint stuff,
Right.
make stuff that you like, and you hope the two match up, but you can't guarantee that. And so then
Yeah.
you got the
Yeah.
choice. Are you going just for market share, or are you hoping the right people will get what you're doing and there's
Right.
enough of them to where you can keep doing it?
Yeah, 100%. So it's kind of funny because it seems like, well, actually, it doesn't seem like one of my friends literally told me he works in the business, does really well as far as his creative output and the stuff that he's
Good.
developed is pretty knockout. And he's like, I've been a big fan of your stuff for years. And he's like, everybody else is doing what you did 10 years ago. And it's like, okay. It's kind of true. I mean, I look at some of the adventures that I put out back then, and it's like, oh yeah, okay. And then I look at some of the stuff coming out right now, and I'm like, I did something just like this, in like 2009. I did it in 2009. I did it in 2014, whatever. That's fine because at least if other people are putting the same kind of thing out or a similar thing or a similar flavored, similar themed thing, then obviously whatever my idea was at the time, well, it didn't suck. So that's
You mentioned the Troll Lord boys being such
mhm,
cool characters.
great
And
guys.
the first time I met Davis, well, the only time I met Davis Chenault was at GaryCon 2019. And I'd been living in New Hampshire for a few years at that point. And so I was used to everybody with that Boston accent. And so when I
Hmm.
got to their table and heard people speaking in a proper American English accent like yours, I was like, oh, this is
Yeah,
music to my ears.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
and they make a great game too.
they're such good guys. They really are. I can't say enough good things about them. I enjoyed every minute working with them. It just happened that Broad God made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and you know how that goes. It's like, hey, would you like all of this access to all of this stuff you helped create the content for, over the last 10 years? I'm like, yeah, I guess.
Now, can you still
It's a
do work for other folks or collaborations with
I
other
do
folks?
when I
Or
have time. The school has gotten harder and harder and harder every year. That's just culture and society and things being what they are. It has a lot to do with I'm never going to be as interesting as a phone. Never. I'm
uh,
never going to be as exciting as whatever's on Netflix or whatever they're watching. I'm not as cool as a TikTok. It is what it is. And I've been around a long time so that I watch people in the political, professional, media completely miss the point of things that are part of young people's culture, and turn it into something that it completely was not, and then kind of co-opt things and make them into their own interpretation of whatever that thing was. I'll give you an example, and it's a really charged word, and I'm not meaning to get into any kind of politics whatsoever, but like I've been around since the word woke actually came up, okay? And what woke meant back in the day was when you had typically a lot of times it was guys, right? Who didn't really pay a whole lot of attention in school, were busy messing around, getting in trouble, goofing off, doing what young people do. So they got bad grades, didn't pay attention, didn't learn any of the stuff that they were taught in school. And then some years go by and they discovered YouTube or whatever, and these things that they didn't learn suddenly became of interest or important to them because they suddenly needed to get an employable kind of job beyond whatever the, kind of thing that they had going at the time. Oftentimes you hit 20, 22 years old and you've been working kind of minimum wage type jobs your whole life, and you realize you need to learn something else in order to feed your family. And so that's where it all came from, and then it got co-opted by these different political people and who turned it into this whole other thing. The whole get woke was you need to learn stuff you never learned before. You need to learn this thing. That's what it came from. And so like I said, I've been around in education over 20 some years, 24 years. And so I've watched this happen and then watched the thing get turned into something that was completely different than what the original meaning was for. How that stuff happens, I don't know. Doesn't really matter. It's just the educational anecdote you got there. So
Interesting. And
yeah,
you brought up how you'll never be as interesting as this phone or this
never,
other mental
never.
fidget spinner, basically.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Oh,
I gotta
absolutely.
wonder because we're fairly close in age.
Hmm.
And in the 90s, I remember seeing this idea of making a generation of baby Einsteins come around. And the idea was you take infants and toddlers and you endlessly stimulate their brain
It's never a
because
good
then
idea.
we're gonna get
Yeah.
nothing but Mozarts and Einsteins in this
Yeah,
man.
no, no. See,
Turns
I had the fortune when I was doing my education thing, not, I guess I don't really talk about that a lot, so it's worth kind of hijacking my conversation a little bit. But I got into teaching later because I got woke and realized I needed insurance to be able to keep my wife alive. Right. So I went back and I had completed almost all my education core, except for the two classes you need to go before you do your student teaching. And I witnessed a workplace aggression between the people who were teaching those courses at the time and chose not to pursue education because I thought, well, that's grimy and gross. And then, two professors were having a tiff with each other, and I witnessed something. It was all that aside. I went back to school, got my teaching degree because I was older, because I was a non-traditional student. I was like 27 when I went back. I didn't have to go move to some little teeny tiny town in the middle of nowhere, Iowa, to do my student teaching for 6 months and pack up everything and do that whole deal. Instead, they set me up with a place that was closer, and the only close place they had was a Malcolm Price Laboratory School, which used to be on the campus of University of Northern Iowa before budget cuts, like I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. They finally axed it, which is a real shame for that community. Because let me tell you what, those kids who go there, they start at kindergarten, preschool, and they are the baby geniuses, the baby Einsteins. I can't tell you how many people that went to that school who worked for the U.S. Diplomatic Corps because they graduate speaking 2 or 3 languages fluently: Portuguese, Spanish, German, French. And the lady, all of the high school teachers and all of the teachers are college professors at the University of Northern Iowa. Every one of them is a full college professor, and because you're their student, okay. And sometimes they may have 2 or 3 kids in their class, and in my case with art, it was like a one-on-one thing. So we had the lady who taught pre-K through 8th grade, and then we had the other one who taught high school. And Dr. Swan's her doctorate's degree was in children's brain research. So to get right down to nuts and bolts, a lot of the things we do with kids in every form of education and media is absolutely bad and wrong. Uh,
had
they
that
need
feeling.
they need as much recess as they can get. People think that's wrong, but it's absolutely, if you want to nurture their brain, you need to get their body going, especially boys. And they force them to sit there 6, 7 hours, 8 hours a day in these cramped little quarters with other kids. And then, they're not getting the attention they need, but they're also not getting their wiggles out. You got to get your wiggles out. When I moved down to
Yeah.
Kansas, if it got below 38 degrees, they quit sending kids outside for recess. And I'm like, you need to go send them outside and blow the funk off of them. You got to get fresh air in these kids' lungs. And they didn't want to hear me because they don't know why I'm saying that. They didn't know that I had learned from this Dr. Swan and all of the wonderful things that she shared and, learned. So when you're doing this with your phone all day long, okay, you're only stimulating one segment of your brain, and you're overgrowthing, overstimulating that part of the brain, but you're actually atrophying other parts of your brain. Now, here's another thing that nobody knows: your brain grows from the outside in, not the inside out. Okay, so you got your little amygdala and all of the little, the primitive lizard brain stuff and your caveman brain down here at the bottom near the stem, but the cortex, cerebral cortex, grows from the outside in. If you do nothing but this all day long, it does two things. One, it stimulates sensors of the brain, which are the same ones that get stimulated by theft and crack cocaine. Okay. So, yeah.
What an
And
interesting combination.
like shoplift, the urge and the thrill that people get from shoplifting and stealing and being watched and seeing if they can get away with it, that thrill is the same thrill that young people get from messing with the device, right? And and if you look at the brain scans, anybody who's listening can go look up the brain scans, and they'll show the brain scans of people who basically abuse devices versus the brains of people who have been physically and mentally abused as children, and people who abuse like methamphetamine, crack cocaine, and the amount of missing, the voids that you have in your brain, things that never fill in. And if they don't fill in by the time you're 22, they're never gonna fill in. Now, they might be filling their brain with other stuff, and that's what's interesting about our newer generations. And I'm not going to bag on them because I don't know how they're going to turn out. We don't know.
Great.
You know, this is an experiment happening in real time. Okay. And consequences, who knows, right? But we do know that there is a direct correlation with a lack of brain matter in certain parts of your brain or an atrophy in that part of your brain versus an overabundance of stimulation and overgrowth in another part of your brain. I mean, that's where all the new neuroscience and stuff is talking. And she knew that kind of thing 24, 25 years ago. So brought that to all of the attention of all the people who went through her program. So I'm conscious of that when I'm trying to get these kids engaged and motivated into doing other things. They're terrified to draw pictures. They're frightened to paint or do anything like that because they're afraid people will see the real them or their real emotions and their real personality show through. Or they've come to a situation where, well, I suck at it, so I just don't have to try because no one's going to make me try.
Dude,
And you
yeah,
can't make me because if you try to make me, I can shut down any adult in 10 seconds because I learned how to do that on TikTok.
you said a whole lot right there.
Yeah.
And just anecdotally, I've noticed some of the things that you're talking about now that you mentioned it. Now and I see what to look for. I'm like, oh yeah, that is there.
It's that whole
Because
left brain, right brain overstimulating one side to the detriment of the other. You got to work both halves. And I mean, some time ago we used to do tricks where you teach the kids different ways to reset their brain. You know, you get them to put their hands together and then fold it out and then do these kind of things because these tricks that you do, you know, make your different hemispheres of your brain work together. When I try and get kids to draw with their opposite hand, they about lose their minds. They will literally, some of them will break down and cry because it's just too hard. Yeah.
sounds like there's a lot of fragility going on here. And so
Yeah.
please
Mm,
add guidance of what you've seen to my thoughts because I've thought about, what's the life experience of those that come after is going to be like.
mm,
And there's so much emphasis on the digits
yeah.
and the unreal world that they don't live in the real world enough.
Mm.
You have to touch things. You have to physically be around people. You can't just
That's
be in a chat room.
Yeah, yeah. What was his name? Dr. Gardner. He was an educational theorist who's pretty much his entire educational theory has gone up in flames over the last decade. But they were really pushing his stuff 20, 25 years ago when I was in my teaching program, and I was very rebellious against that even back then because they're like he was the mastermind behind the multiple intelligence theories, I believe. And so, they're like, oh, well, if you want to teach a kid about the ocean, you should bring some sand and some seashells and a little eyedropper with some salt water and all that kind of stuff. I raised my hand. I said, have you ever been snorkeling? And she says, well, no. I said, well, neither have these kids, but let me tell you what. You want to know about the ocean? Go let some friendly Jamaican fella drive in a boat and take you out to where you can't see the land anymore and chuck your butt overboard in the water, and then you know about the ocean.
Yeah, the ocean's terrifying,
You
but
you you
as
feel
long as you
that
just see a picture of
pressure.
it, it's
Yeah,
not
even if
real.
you're on the surface, the pressure of it when you're out in the actual sea, pushing against your body and pushing against your lugs, and the waves smacking you in the face. That's the ocean. The ocean is a terrifying monster, and you need to be very, very careful of it because it is the lifeblood of Mother Nature. You know what I mean? That is the thing that it is an organ that will crush you in a heartbeat. And so I just thought it was kind of like I was against that. It was also the age and days of was it 101 ways to praise a child, and they'd have these little posters you were supposed to put on the wall, and I'm like, that's not helping. What do you mean? I'm like, it's not going to help because your boss isn't going to give you praise like that. They just want you to complete the piece of work. If you're at McDonald's, they're not going to give you a pat on the back and say attaboy every time you shove a quarter pounder out the window. They expect you to do that job, period. And they're sometimes not going to be friendly about it. And
And so the
yeah.
multiple intelligences theory, that's the one where basically it was a way to get around facing the reality that some kids just aren't that bright. And so you came up with
Well,
other
yeah,
ways
and it's
of
not that a
calling
lot of
something
them don't have
intelligent to make them
yeah,
feel better
it's
about
not that
themselves.
people don't have the potential of being, intelligent or learning things or whatever, any of that, I mean, are there limits to what you can learn? It depends. See, that goes back to my Dr. Swan, who I worked with, right? Because you may not be biologically or emotionally ready to learn a thing at the time that a school district forces you to learn it. And our entire American school system has been a hot mess for far too long because we keep trying to do things the same way. I was in a superintendent's meeting one time where he talked about where our old superintendent talked about he went to a national conference and they found out that people's math scores were better if they had math after gym class because the endorphins and things from exercising and working out, the extra oxygen helped them focus on solving the problems. So all of these superintendents are getting back there with their calculator and getting on their Amazon accounts, figuring how they're going to put a treadmill in the math class so they can make these kids run a mile before they take a test or some kind of thing like that. That's how dumb things are. When you take Americans and we go overseas and they compare, there's a whole bunch of things about the data that's all goofy and wrong as well. But they'll go overseas and they'll say, oh, well, these people do better at this and these people do better at that. What are they doing different? What are they doing different? And they tell them specifically exactly what they're doing different. And we as Americans refuse to implement any of those things or listen in any way, shape, or form. We just categorically we ask dumb questions like, how soon can someone be ready to do that? So the next thing you know, our kids are getting these tough algebra equations when they're fifth graders. And then they cry and cry and cry because they're doing homework now until 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night. Got to turn around, be back to school 9 a.m. the next morning, not finished with the homework that the parents don't understand because they didn't do it when they were in school either. But
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then we have this fallacy about our graduation rate and all of this kind of thing. You know, like, oh, the graduation rate's bad, the graduation rate's good. Let's be real, people. We didn't have a graduation rate until the 1950s, period. Okay. The average person dropped out of school. Eighth grade was the end of their schooling, and most of them finished at sixth grade if they went at all. There was no requirement for any of them to go to school, so we don't know how intelligent people were, how well educated they were. You know, the idea was for everybody to get a even Steven level of education across the board so that we'd be able to do basic functions in a basic function kind of job during the industrial boom of the 1950s, right? So we didn't have a graduation rate. It wasn't a thing that they talked about, you know. And they go, oh, well, in the Civil War, look at the letters that they wrote that were so fantastic. And it's like that's what some of the guys wrote. Okay. But 75-80% of the guys who were in any individual unit or battalion were functionally illiterate as well. So we're actually doing better than we think. Is a long way to get around to say that. We're actually doing better than we think, but we could do much better and we could be creating geniuses, but instead we're making things hard because we want to get it done faster than everyone else,
So
you
what are
know?
some of the things that we reject by and large in most American public school systems?
Okay, take this. It's been the tradition in every school system forever that you take Algebra 1, then you take geometry, then you take Algebra 2. Why? Why do you do it that way? Why don't you take Algebra 1 and Algebra 2? Well, you need to know some of the stuff from geometry to do Algebra 2. Okay, so why are we teaching the most physics oriented classes in an opposite year from the year that you're taking the algebra classes that help you solve the physics class? See what I'm saying? Why aren't we taking chemistry nested with this math class? Why aren't we teaching them together? All right. Why aren't the story problems in your math class about chemistry or about the thing instead of this train's going and this is I'm going to find out about that on the 5 o'clock news. And that's what I told them when I was in school. If the two trains collide, I'm going to hear about it, you know? But it's like, yeah. So they reject the idea of nesting those kind of things. We reject the year-round class school in some fashion. I know that the big assumption is teachers get so much time off, but not really. If you look at PTO for a lot of big businesses compared to what teachers now get, it's roughly the same amount of time between sick leave and vacation. I think teachers come out like 2 weeks ahead,
For
but
Americans,
also
that's a pretty big deal.
30% less salary for the
Yeah, that's
extra
a
two
thing, ain't
weeks.
it?
Yeah. So that's a big you know, it's like 2 weeks should not be worth $33,000.
Be some
Yeah.
mighty productive weeks.
Yeah, yes. If they broke it up, I'd love it if they broke it up to, where they have it every, you go for 2 months and take 2 weeks off, 2 months, take 2 weeks off and do that, or whatever's because I'd definitely be able to go visit places around the world and see a lot more things than I'm able to do while I'm employed because you got your choice of the summer and that's it.
Yeah,
So
at the height of tourist season for
yeah,
most
where
of
it's
the
the
world
most
that you'd want to
expensive
visit.
and yeah,
So it's
yeah,
most expensive and you're competing with everybody else and it's competing with everything else that you want to do with your kids and
yeah.
all that. Now,
Mhm.
one thing that seemed to stick out to me from a flaw in the education system is that there was a constant churn of here's the big curriculum idea that we're going to run for 2 years because some PhD made some money selling it to us, and then we're going to realize it's garbage, and then we're going to change
Oh
a
no, they
whole
knew
dynamic
they
and just keep
probably
doing that.
yeah, they probably knew it was garbage to begin with.
So why did they take it?
Because of your budgets, man, because your funding. If you're not trying something new and the thing you did before doesn't work, you don't get any money.
So what does work?
Ah,
What kind of system do you think will work? And if you say
You know,
Common Core, then I'm already going to think
yeah.
that you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Thanks, Bill
yeah.
Gates.
No, I mean, some of that, like I said, that kind of also goes to that the Common Core thing is a whole nother bag of snakes. It's some of it isn't bad, but a lot, but some of it is. And
Bag of snakes. I hadn't heard that before. That's good.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and also the fact that each state was able to purchase whatever they felt was the most appropriate package of those education programs. So there are states who we know are very anti-education for whatever reason that they choose to be that way because they want to, the homeschool thing, whatever. That's the whole nother thing. But if you choose the bad one on purpose and you know it's going to fail, then you're going to get your way eventually. You know, if you set things up to fail at the state level, then they will fail. And that has been a big sticking point for the whole education system for years. People are not getting in their way, one way, shape, or form. If it was people who didn't get their way because they were upset about desegregation, that's a big reason why they would cut funding for the schools because they don't agree with it, so they're not going to vote for it. You know, and that's been where you see this bounce of things. Well, I don't like it, I don't agree with it because I'm not getting my way, so I'm gonna vote against it. Or I don't like this thing they're talking about, so I'm going to approve it, but then we're only going to approve the worst level of this particular program that we know is going to fail so that we can get what we want eventually. That's how that stuff works. It's all money, man.
That sounds terrible because you're
Yeah.
screwing up people's life
Ruining
trajectories.
people's lives and making the things much more difficult for our nation. Like I said, not everybody's ready to do Algebra 1 when they're 14 years old, but they might be ready when they're 17. It might be. I couldn't figure it out when I was in high school. I had to take Algebra 2 in college like 3 times before I finally passed it so that they would let me stay in school. I had all A's and B's in all my other core classes in college, but couldn't pass that math class because I wasn't ready. Then one day I was like, I don't know, 20 years old, and it finally clicked for me, passed the test, boom, I'm out of there. And the last time I actually remember having to do a math problem of algebra 2 type thing was playing Knights of the Old Republic when you got to reprogram that assassin droid. It's an algebra problem. If you get it right, he's your ally and assistant. He's the toughest NPC you're going to get in the game. And if you fail, he's going to kill you and your entire party right there on the spot.
So that's the incentive that worked on you. Man, so yeah, when I
Yeah.
was in school, high school, college, I was one of the folks who was smart enough to do what I needed to do to get by and do fine on grades. Usually A's, high B, stuff like that, but I didn't have to work too hard. But
Mhm.
looking back at it, got my bachelor's and master's, and then I joined the Army and got slapped around in there a lot. But once I was done my 3.5 years, I thought, man, I could have done so much more with the education that I had with this new self-discipline and
Right.
keener eye and clearer
Right.
thinking because I was lazy and just trying to check blocks and get by back in the day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so disciplining kids, how is that today?
Uh, you know, I mean, you get nowhere if you don't have any parent support.
Uh,
And that's it. And, I mean, we just, I'd say not to put it on any kind of negative route. we in general do better than we have. It doesn't always seem to play out that way because the media has always got its opinions and points of view and things that it can come after. A successful school system is going to involve parent involvement, getting people to buy in with your plan, to provide successes and opportunities for those kids. Right now, the things like, I'll say the thing that drives me the nuttiest, your Mike Rowe guy, okay? You know, he's all blah, blah, blah. We need to be teaching the trades and blah, blah, blah. So then you see that pop up on your internet feed every day. Maybe you've shared it at some point in time in your past or whatever. And the bottom line is, yeah, we're still teaching the trades. But what happened to the trades in school? What happened to teaching auto shop in school? And what happened to teaching a lot of those, woodworking skills and metalworking skills and all of that kind of stuff? Well, that was your junior colleges and your for-profit institutions got those pulled out of the public schools. Okay. So the very same people that he is getting his check from to do their commercials are the same ones that pulled those programs out of the public schools in the first place because they wanted you to fill out a FAFSA so that you can create a debt with yourself and your government. And they're going to take that debt from the government and they're going to cash your check. And they don't care if you survive one semester or not, because that's guaranteed $4,000 for every student that gets enrolled minimum, right? And if it's a for-profit private college, right, it could be 8, 10, 12, 15, 20, $30,000. So
Wow.
what,
I'd never heard
yeah,
that before, but
yeah, so I get angry with that dude for saying those things because he's kind of speaking out of both sides of his mouth when he does that. You know what I mean? You know the reason why we don't do it in the schools. Quit acting like we don't or like we're not trying. Meanwhile, schools that are successful, like the one I work at, we have opportunities for kids to go and work in airframe. I know we're so far away from gaming and stuff right now, so I don't know how much
this
we're
was
going to
on
get
the
into this, but
agenda.
yeah, yeah.
We're
Well,
fine.
yeah, we have composite materials. They can go learn composite materials. They can learn how to rivet an airplane, put it together. They actually build a airplane and they take it out to the Cessna practice field and or over to Jabara's airport and take it up in the air. And if it passes, they pass. You know, so yeah, man, that's an opportunity, and they're going to be if we get a bond that goes through, they're going to be putting one of those type facilities right on our campus with our kids. So the ones who qualify for it, sign up for it, want to do it, and they've got their grades and their classes taken care of. They're going to do their 2, 3 hours in the morning, getting their math, reading, and social studies core taken care of. Or you'll see the ones, why don't they teach basic check and bookkeeping and all of that kind of stuff? And it's like they've done that ever since the banks crushed our economy 15, 16 years ago in order to get the TARP passed to give all of those people their money back after they stole
Oh,
all the money in the first place. I hate this. Uh, in order
bruh.
to do that, Congress made it a law that you have to teach that in school to every graduating senior. Every state has a program where you have to have a course on financial literacy. Every state has a financial literacy. So acting like we don't teach that in school, we taught it, you didn't pay attention. You
Well,
know,
that
if,
actually
if you
seemed like
graduated in the last 14 years, you've had that class, period.
that seemed like a inappropriate thing for schools to be teaching to me because we're the parents. Shouldn't you be teaching your kids some life skills? Are you outsourcing all the rest of the life skills
Hey,
to
man.
somebody else too?
Right, but I
You
mean
know?
that goes to a lot of American core values, which is what? Have a big truck and a big boat and a cabin and a fishing lodge or whatever you got. You got all of these things on your 60 to $90,000 a year income. You got $500,000 worth of debt. I think a lot of these folks have rolling around these days, right? Or more if they bought a big huge house. So why would we expect them to know how to teach their kids not to piss away their money?
Well, the best financial literacy program I know about is Dave Ramsey because I listened to him for decades.
Yeah,
And he says, be debt free. Do that. Don't buy that big truck. Don't buy that
right,
extra cabin you don't need.
right, right.
Pay off your house and then pay cash for everything else that you want. You got me started on this. The finance bros, the big
Mhm.
brains, the modern wannabe Julius Caesars of the finance world.
Yeah.
They're a bunch of criminals and they're screwing over all the rest of us. And
Yeah, and they also told the American people, if you try to put us in jail for what we've done, we won't fix it.
Well, they're not fixing it anyway.
Wasn't
And
wasn't that pretty much literally what one of those guys? I don't want to name his name because I don't want his lawyers to sue me, but he runs a big bank.
well, I remember when I was buying the house in New Hampshire, when I was moving up there, I fired my first mortgage agent because he said when I wanted to put down a bunch of cash to
Mhm.
help, alleviate the debt. And he advised me, oh no, you can do zero down and then you could take that and invest it everywhere else. And I was like, this guy does not have my interest at heart
Mhm. Mhm.
because more debt equals more troubles. More
Right.
debt equals fewer options. And options are what gives you power in life. If you're
Yeah.
stuck with one answer, you are powerless. You are stuck. But if you've got freedom to move and you got a few options, then you got
Right.
power. And the troubled asset relief program that you talked about, TARP from 2008, that thing pisses me off so much. And it's my show, so I'm going to talk about it because this is the dumbest thing, the credit default swaps. So you take a bunch of folks who are big banks and investment firms who already have like no actual money
Mhm.
that's all tied up in imaginary spreadsheets all over the place. All of our fiat currency is imaginary. None of
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
has any real value. Your bank probably has like no cash on hand. It's all a text document. It's not even like a full Word document. It's like a TXT. That's what your bank account is. And
Yeah.
it didn't make any sense to me at the time that the big problem was, oh, all these subprime mortgages is terrible. We got to spend all this money to bail out these banks who made a bunch of bad bets. And I was thinking, well, wait a second. If we took this same amount of money and actually paid off all those mortgages, then it's not bad debt anymore. Why don't we just do that? Well, that wouldn't cover them. That's the problem. It wouldn't cover the banks. Now, the amount of prosperity it could bring to the American people, suddenly having their single biggest debt and monthly payment
Yeah.
alleviated, could you imagine the kind of discretionary spending people could do at that point? But that's not what they want. They wanted
No.
to cover their own asses and screw everybody else. And so, like,
Like
if
I
a
said,
future
when a particular CEO who's
nameless,
still nameless
yeah,
says so told them flat out, well, if you try to prosecute us, then we won't be able to tell you how to fix the economy.
they weren't going to tell us anyway.
No,
It's a it's a
they
deal with the
figured the whole
devil.
thing out from the jump, man. It's yeah. Oh, I know.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare. But like I said, gaming,
No,
gaming
no, no.
art.
You're not getting away from this. I'm dragging you back to it because a future president is going to be required to repudiate the debt at some point because no
Mhm.
country in the history of the world has ever owed this much money and they
Sure.
certainly never paid it back.
Yeah.
So it's going to have to go away. And just by saying, screw you. And frankly, there's a legitimate, almost moral case for it because so much of this spending was done in bad faith.
Mhm.
Now, some of it was done in good faith. And sorry, we're all going to get hit with a brick on that day. But screw you people, you know? Okay, now calm down. And can we stay talking about the art,
Mhm.
your professional experience?
Yeah.
So you studied art at University of Northern Iowa. What's
Mhm.
it like being an art student? I was a poli-sci guy, so what
Uh,
kind of
it,
experience was that?
it was a eye-opening experience because you got to meet a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different just everything. I mean, everything that you can think of, there was some major who was majoring in art that would surprise you. We had a lady who was a Muslim immigrant from the Philippines. We had a kid who was there on a wrestling scholarship. We had a and okay, he's going to major in art. We had, people whose goal was to eventually be a building or district administrator. They were in the arts so that they could go get an art degree, be an art teacher, become an art director for a school district, become a superintendent of a school, that kind of thing. You had people of all of the different sexual lifestyles, whatever their particular. You had critique, which was sometimes brutal, but they don't teach you a lot of technique in art school. The technique is something you're going to have to go and research and find and figure out yourself. So the blessings that I've had in the last 20 years is to get to know a lot of really great artists, and over the last 8 or so years to be their boss, to be able to pick up things that I never learned in school, that they use technique styles and things like that, but at the same time, like be able to share some of the things that I do. Like I switched to acrylic years ago after some incidences with some oil paint and some people who've had some poor health and sickness from oil paint. And so I had to come up with a way to make my acrylic paintings look like oil paintings as much as possible because I like that look, I like that aesthetic. And being a gamer and learning to paint miniatures and sitting over at a table by the guys from Reaper Mini, and their professional painters are using mopping glow to thin their paint with as a medium and creating all kinds of different glazes and effects. And I'm like, I wonder if I can apply that to a canvas, and it works. So there you go.
Cool.
Yeah.
So was your art major experience mostly like art history?
I did well in art history, but I actually studio emphasized in painting and jewelry making. And then when I went back to get my teaching degree, I reemphasized in graphic design illustration. So I've got a ton of studio experience. And I was doing illustrations for North American Review for when I was finishing up my teaching degree. So that
Sweet.
was all
All
right.
right. Since you got me talked down and I'm chilling now, and you
Yeah.
told us what it's like being an art student. Actually, there's something I do want to tack on to that. I was a political science major, and a big
Mhm.
component of informing the political theories that I was studying would be history classes. And
Right.
Roman history buff, big Byzantophile, got married in the Hagia Sophia.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to
Yeah.
convince my wife that I really wanted to marry her, so I picked to me what is like the center of the world, the most beautiful place ever wrought by hands, to make sure that she knew I was serious. And 14 years on, she believes me. She believes me.
Yeah, oh, yeah. That's good. That's good.
But one of my Roman history teachers, he like died during the
Mhm.
course, like not in a class session, but over the course of the course. And
Yeah.
they subbed in an art history professor. He was better than the history professor.
Yeah. Well, art history is history. Hands down, art history is history. You know everything about the sophistication of a culture by the quality of its artwork. So most of Europe, from the Ural Mountains all the way to the islands off the coast of England, had impacted by the Roman Empire, which was heavily influenced by the Greeks, and the Greeks were heavily influenced by the Egyptians. Who, so yeah, it's that history is history, and the history that we know about. I tell this to students to kind of get them to start thinking about how important learning and culture and art and all of that stuff really is by saying, listen, we only have about 25, 30,000 years of actual like known history. We've only got like, what is it, 5,000 years of recorded history. We know about the other stuff because we found all of their stuff. And then I go, okay, and human beings as we look today have only been around for 500,000 years, right? I'm like, now divide that 20,000 years of what we know by 500,000 years, and we could have screwed this up a whole bunch of times in the past.
Yes, absolutely.
And,
And
and that's where my exploration place for writing fantasy RPGs starts from. I don't like to plant things. Everybody goes through this thing when you start out in RPGs where you're like, I want it to be this classical French, English, Welsh, Viking thing, whatever. I mean, to me, really the only one that still kind of lands for me personally is the Viking thing because you're always going to end up with pirates no matter what. It's like Viking was a job, it wasn't a group of people, because when they have just in recent years like dug into the teeth of these people that they find buried in these burial mounds with these long ships, they're like, oh, they're not all from like Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland. They're from like areas around there. Some of them are from there and some of them aren't. And it's because it was a job.
adventuring is a job. That they were
Adventuring is the job,
adventurers.
and then they found just as many women's bones in full armor, buried in full armor, as they did men's. So then that whole shield maiden thing that we have stories of going back to Brunhild, right? It holds weight that they fought side by side with the men. If they wanted their piece of plunder, they went to go get the piece of plunder as long as they didn't have children to take care of at home. So that part's kind of cool, but like I said, I want fantasy that's derived from fantasy. That's where I'm at. I'm down with things. Look at how Michael Moorcock is one of my great examples, and what a volume of work. And he's got that article, and I do this every once in a while. If I have a module I'm trying to complete and I've got a short period of time, where basically he's like, disconnect yourself from everything, get in a quiet place, brew up a couple pots of coffee, and write your ending, write your beginning, meet him in the middle. He goes, you should have some kind of action happening every so many pages. You should have some kind of thing that releases another piece of vital information for the protagonist to go upon the rest of their journey every so many pages. And it's like, it's not that it's really a formula, it is, but it just helps you focus your thoughts and things. But if you look at like, the Elric saga, that's pretty wild. You've got a teeny tiny island country, is about the size of Japan or whatever, that had superior technology, magic, monsters. They had dragons that they trained. They made deals with demons and devils and elementals, and they were great wielders of magic. And, they ruled everyone from terror, even though their population was extremely tiny. That's a really cool whole fantasy genre right there that isn't based on a slavish appropriation of medieval European culture. There's weird things going on there. There's different things. Yeah, they fight with swords and bows and arrows, but they are not in this world. And I love that. That's the kind of stuff that inspires me. Even, Robert Howard's stuff, it's like, yeah, it's the Hyborian age. Well, that's a different age of Earth altogether. That's one of those lost and forbidden ages that I just referred to that happened. Oops, they goofed up and calamities happened, and this whole culture, this whole world, this whole civilization morphed into whatever. And I also like his philosophy of de-evolution, where it's like the barbarian is the prime human being, the Sumerian is the prime state of humanity, or even, some of the guys in Kush, they're noble savages, that they are no BS, and they're going to come at you straight off. Exactly what they say, you don't say mean things when you get an axe in your face for saying them, so they're a more polite society.
And it's the people that are in the cities that are the stupid, the lazy, the
The
decadent
scoundrels and the
ones,
thieves and the
the
ne'er-do-wells
liars.
and yeah.
Because an axe in your face is honesty.
Right, right.
There's no different interpretation of that and what that means.
You offended me and you're going to pay, and that's going to be an example to everybody else. And that's a pure fantasy format that doesn't force itself to be specifically in this little teeny tiny box. I like what a lot of the kids are doing these days, because I'm around kids, and a lot of them had never played like face-to-face D&D before, but they played the hell out of D&D during the pandemic because they all played on Skype and all of these Zoom and all of
Discord
these
and all
different
that.
things. So that's why the current uptick in popularity to the game and how it's grown this widespread acceptance. I don't know. I used to go back and forth with Bill Webb and Matt Finch about, no guns, no guns and stuff, no black powder and all of this kind of thing. And I'm like, you guys are the ones that always want to slavishly hold to this kind of historical epoch that you imagine. Guns were around back then. Gunpowder was around back then. I was like Joan of Arc. They bombarded cities with cannons and cannonballs made out of huge globs of stone. It's like, come on, y'all. And it's never going to be a fight I'm going to win, because they go back to some Dragon magazine where it's like, no.
Well, who's writing the fantasy world? You were Dragon Magazine. And
Right, right.
well, I
Yeah,
like
they
the
didn't pick
variety
up
of
any of my
settings.
stuff, so
Well, I like a variety of settings for just to get into the spirit of them and to
right,
kind of vicariously live in that time. Like On
right.
Guard, set in Three Musketeer eras, Paris, France, where it's all about social climbing, getting the best whores,
Sure.
getting in sword duels with each other. Heck of a lot of fun.
Yeah,
But I tend to agree with you that the deep history of mankind, the stuff that we don't have usable evidence for, there's no guarantees what it was like or what we were like, what we acted like. The world we have today is heavily influenced by the Western ethos. Christianity and rationalism merged together, whether it's a good combination or not, it's basically what it is. And so we live in cultural safety rails like that. Even communist China is to a large degree influenced by that, but there's no guarantee this is going to stay. This
yeah,
certainly wasn't the dynamic for most of our recorded history.
yeah.
The world of humanity and how we can be and comport ourselves, I'm open to the craziest stuff because we're capable of the craziest stuff.
Mhm.
There's a lot of exciting opportunities in there in the
Oh yeah.
fictional world. Now, I tend to like these safety rails, but they're getting battered down. So I'm going to have to adapt to whatever comes next, right?
Right. That's where everybody's at right now, I think. And it's,
Uh,
that's why I think people are more pushing, driving themselves more towards the fantasy escapism is a place to spend some time. And that the younger folks are learning that the tactile function of dice and pencils and miniatures and the whole thing, for one, it is a lifestyle for some of us. But I don't know that it's necessarily a lifestyle brand like they're trying to put out on, like Amazon channels and things like that. That's kind of amusing to me too.
mm,
But it goes to one of those things, like I said, I watch the kids play. The things they do, we can learn from them. There's this kind of grognard mentality when you talk about old school stuff. If you want to get kids to buy onto old school gaming, you go, it's like Dark Souls. And they understand that because Dark Souls is one of the hardest video games in the world. But there's that feeling you get of accomplishment,
satisfaction. Yeah.
satisfaction if you live through that kind of ordeal. Again, I'm not one to heavily bag on Wizards of the Coast like a lot of my colleagues and peers are. They're putting out a product they're designed specifically for a market and a demographic that is not me, and I'm okay with that. I don't care what they do. They can say it's this, that, and the other thing. That doesn't change how I run the game at my table. That doesn't change the kind of adventures I'm going to write, the kind of settings I'm going to create, the kind of villains I'm going to develop, or any of that kind of thing. None of that changes. The only thing that changes is how new players receive that data or receive that info. And a lot of my old grognard buddies cannot get it through their old grognard head that these kids grew up watching Lord of the Rings. They're already familiar with elves, balrogs, wizards, magic. They've watched anime that is more true to Dungeons and Dragons of our era than any Dungeons and Dragons cartoons that have ever been put out. They already get it. So they don't necessarily want to play the old Hobbit stuff that we played because that was new and fresh to us. They want to play things that are new and fresh to them. So they want to be furbolgs or furries or turtles or any of that kind of stuff. Good. It brought them to the table. They're sitting around, they're chuckling, they're having dice, they're, rolling dice, drinking Mountain Dew, they're having a good time. Good. What's bad about that? Not a thing. And they're having their kind of fun, but it's still a role-playing game. It's still fundamentally D&D. They're still rolling dice. They're still getting that thing. But they're kind of starting to realize, and that's one of the things where God bless Baldur's Gate 3, because however you feel about any of the romancing nonsense that goes on, I had a charisma 23 bard who got broken up with. I mean, there was like no romance involved. I got dumped by one of the NPCs because I wasn't taking them out into battle frequently enough, and I wasn't being attentive to whatever their quest needs were. And I think that's absolutely hilarious that somebody who's basically so charming that it shouldn't be even a question of whether or not everyone would be falling over themselves to get with my character. They wanted nothing to do with me. And my playthrough was so awkward and terrible because I tried to be a kind, good, caring person because I like to try and emulate that in my own life. I mean, we've all had times where we're real bastards and terrible people. And for whatever psychological reason you grow up, you feel you need to atone for, the sins of your past and what have you. I write a lot of villains. I write a lot of complicated bad guys. I create complicated bad guys who live in complicated societies and do terrible things on the regular, and they don't see it as a bad, wrong thing in any way, shape, or form because that's their culture, their society, that's their norm. Okay, cool. So I don't want to be that bad guy when I'm playing. As a player, I want to try and be the character that Arthur strived for in Excalibur. Whether he failed or succeeded or not, I want to be that guy.
So let me get this straight. You wrote Raslam Asylum with Giddy
Yeah,
Grins, and you wrote City of Brass with
yeah,
one of the most intimidating villains ever. And
yeah,
you want
yeah.
to be the lawful good, goody two
Novelist
shoes.
Al-Khabith, yeah, Novelist Al-Khabith. The evil one of the yeah.
So,
Ruler,
speaking
ruler of
of,
evil, yeah, and all that entails. I have a whole nother City of Brass adventure that I haven't published yet, and I've run it a couple times that talks about things he does to people who assist him in conquering their own worlds.
yeah, you told me about that before, and
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
not spoil that here. But that was, it was intimidating, and that helped cement in my mind that this dude is metal.
yeah,
Casey is metal because, like, you have to understand a certain amount of where that came from, where those attitudes would come from before
Right,
you could write that.
right,
Yeah.
right. I grew up in a tough town. I did. I mean, it's people are like Iowa. It's like then ask people from Iowa about Waterloo and they all go, "Oh, yeah." I mean, it's a tough town. It's a tough town. It had a lot of crazy things happen for the years. There's a lot of organized crime involved there that's been there since way back, way, way back. Like there's a suburb that I lived near for a long time. In fact, I lived, it was the first house I had was in that suburb when I was a little kid and promptly moved and then moved again and that kind of thing. But it's kind of the part of town where like a lot of the bikers and meth labs and stuff had been for a while when we moved to Kansas from Iowa. But in the 19 like 30s when it was 1920s when it was first established, the mob built it there to be like a hideaway fishing cabin retreat so that the guys from Kansas City and St. Louis and Minneapolis and Chicago could all meet on neutral ground, you know.
Wow. Okay,
And
that makes those two, that life experience and City of Brass suddenly make a lot more sense to me.
yeah, yeah. If you
Yeah.
see these things, you watch these things, and you learn from that. And I'm also a big fan of movies like Goodfellas, Godfather, that kind of thing. I worked in a movie theater for a long time when I was a kid, from like literally the day after I turned 16 until I was 18, 19 years old. I worked at a movie theater, 4 or 5 days a week. Got to watch all the good movies. But I've
Yeah.
just always been fascinated by the bad guys and how I think how terrifying and intimidating Darth Vader was when I was 7, 8 years old. I'm 52 now. So, I mean, first time you see Star Wars, Darth Vader scares the crap out of you on the big screen.
Well, it's hard to have an interesting story when the main opposition to the protagonist, whether that's nature or whether that's a person or a
Mhm.
demon or whatever, isn't intimidating and isn't credible. They have to be both a credible threat and
Right.
you need something to compel people to really view this guy as a person of interest and that needs defeating.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that makes sense. Of all the works that you've done, the
Mm.
RPG works that you've written, what's the one you're most proud of?
See, that's tough. It's kind of there's kind of like I'm going to give four things here. I'm really pleased that I was given the opportunity to go back and expand Bard's Gate and City of Brass from their third edition roots to really fill them in. We had a lot of pressure at the time from our publishing partner to, get these manuscripts done, get them turned over, get them turned in, stop now. I always felt that Bard's Gate needed a kind of not really an adventure path, but just a series of adventures for certain levels of characters, things they can do to get them interacted and involved and give them ownership with the setting. And how it's tied in with Absathor and Rappanathic automatically gives it such a great in the Stoneheart Valley product that we put out, which is kind of a combination of a bunch of those books, mostly Tomb of Absathor and all of the extra things that came with Crucible of Freya. It ties in with those so well, but it's I wanted to give it that home base feel where it had its own unique stuff. So I'm proud of how that turned out the second time, and I got to say, it is constantly in development. Italians, Kaizoku Press licensed it from us, released it in Italy. It's gotten rave reviews there. They took and expanded all of the NPCs and gave them all a stat block, like every single NPC. So I think we've recently released that as like a product, so you can get all the NPCs from there in that. So, like I said, yeah, am I proud of that? Yeah, because I was very inexperienced at the time, and a lot of people who were working on that project quit in the middle of it. Same thing with City of Brass. It started out with like a team of 5 or 6 people and ended up basically being me and Scott Green with the first one. And yeah, so it was a lot. It was a lot to take and distill that down and keep what was important and keep what wasn't. Having played City of Brass all the way through twice, once with the 3.5 edition, then again with 5e while I was finishing up the campaign for that, expanding it and whatnot. A lot of the things that happened in our third edition adventure found their way into the fifth edition version of the book because it was just so cool the way the players approached things. I wanted to the guy who was Ard, he named himself after the Ard, leader of the people from heavy metal. That's my Lochnar, that guy, right? But he pulls me aside and he's like, "Hey, I want you to know this." And I'm like, "Okay." This is like one of our very first sessions. He goes, "Not me, but my character. My character worships the devil. So whenever we're not in campaign, he's going to the market to purchase sacrifices to the devil. And I'm like, what? I was like, here's a guy who grew up during the satanic panic clearly and was like totally rebelled the other way. So he's like, and I am going to betray the entire party at a critical moment in this campaign. I said,
Wow.
okay. I'm like, and here's, and I'm like, and I could never understand these guys that like want to play these real super evil characters. I mean, I get the greedy evil, right? Because let's be honest, a lot of our named spell wizards and named magic item characters from the AD&D era, they ended up evil. They didn't necessarily start out that way, but they ended up that way
They weren't
because
good people.
they were greedy. They were greedy over magic items. They would like basically if they could push one of the other characters aside to get to that magic item, and that's where that whole joke about the head of Vecna comes from. It's all about how greedy that particular crew of original players were when it came to finding and exploring and experimenting with new artifacts and magic items. Anyways, yeah, I like to play the good guys, but I write the bad guys. Proud of. I'm really happy with how the fungus god from outer space, how the encephalon gorgers on the moon. That's kind of a little mini saga that I'm working on. I've got another module that I'm going to write for that. I've got the outline done. Maps have become my Achilles heel. I used to love drawing them when I was a kid, and now it's just like, what? When you're designing a game, you got to know how many rooms that you're going to need. You got to know how many. It's kind of like the Michael Moorcock design of write a novel in a weekend kind of deal. It's the how many combat encounters versus how many things. How important is it to know what these NPCs are about and their machinations and their ideas? And I like to give all of that stuff to the game masters so they can decide how that best works for the players that they have, because their players are ultimately what their story is all about, where they should be. Your character's experiences. I'm not a big guy about like write a 1,000-page backstory before you come to my table. I want to give your character the experience of living their life from the start. Because to me, that's always been a richer thing.
Hmm.
But yeah, the Encephalon Gorgers, Fungus God, I don't know. I don't want to call it a trilogy because it might end up being 3, 4, 5 books before I'm all said and done. But that vibe is I'm really pleased with that because I put a lot of thought into what makes it a great game, what makes a good adventure, what's going to give people satisfaction at the table, and what's going to give that guy who spent the money on this book the most bang for the buck. I want it to be fun. I want it to be playable. I've worked with people in the past throughout this. They call it an industry, which makes me chuckle, and I won't get into all of that. But in the RPG business, I've had people who are very well known and very well respected tell me to my face, not anyone I currently work with, just so they know, that they literally, and I quote, I don't give a shit if they play my book at all. As long as they bought it, that's all I care about.
Yeah. I
And
guess some people got to manage their
And
expectations,
I,
and
I just take
some
that
wind
like a
up there.
slap in the face as a gamer. Why, as a
Yeah.
gamer, as someone who's been playing since I was like 6 or 7 years old on the neighbor's porch, right? It's like because my
Yeah.
mom wanted to be able to stick her head out and make sure everything was cool. But yeah, you
That's
know,
some
uh,
stuff.
yeah, I
But
just can't get behind that philosophy. I want
speaking
it
of
to play. I
fungus
want it to be
god,
fun.
I'd heard you talking about that on Rolling Bones, and I checked it out. And that's such a cool concept. And I
Yeah,
had such a fun time reading it that when I saw that there's other adventures connected to it, I'm like, okay, well, I guess I got to go read these
yeah,
then too, because the different type of adventure that's happening here, the stakes of what's
mhm.
happening here, I haven't seen done a lot. And this is a very interesting kaiju kind of way of doing it. And I'm like, yes, this is where has this been my whole life?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah,
the only other gaming product I remember seeing like kaiju actually featured in was the original Oriental Adventures, where they had stat blocks for them.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Uh,
this was, it fed that sweet tooth. And I've been a big fan of Godzilla and all those other movies
yeah.
for
I
decades.
put a kaiju-esque kind of creature, more of a Kong type creature, and it hasn't been reprinted and hasn't been republished, and I don't know if it ever will. But the original printing, third edition of Dead Man's Chest had the island of Bonjo Tombo, where I kind of like the whole Kong Skull Island, and I kind of like one of the first books we read together on a trip when I was a kid was Treasure Island. So I was like, Treasure Island, but with King Kong, pirate ship, why
Yeah.
not, you know? And then relics that you can trick out your boat because my boss is the same way. We're big fans of putting people on boats and sending them out to sea to go find the dungeon that they're supposed to get to. Because that was fun in Ultima, and by golly, it's fun in every RPG I've ever played. But
It
man,
is.
getting people to get on the boat in the first place, you better have a really good adventure and you better have some really good technique for making it interesting, you know? But
Well,
yeah, you put them on a boat and they're like, I'm in full plate. If I hit the water, I'm gonna die. And it's like, I know, fun, right? Yeah,
they
yeah.
are. And the City of Brass, I got the fifth edition hardback of that.
Yeah,
And it's 500 plus pages
yeah,
of
yeah. It's
content, and
like a half a
it's
million words. Yeah.
that also I'm impressed by the scale of what it is, because in that, just to give a little bit away, there is a interplanar invasion and attempted
Mhm.
takeover
Absolutely.
happening.
Absolutely.
And in Dungeons and Dragons mythology, and it's gotten, I think, more prevalent as the editions have gone on, there's always a threat of the abyss trying to do that, or
Mhm.
some thought about the mind flayers doing it. But I haven't seen it on screen much. But this adventure puts it on screen and gives you a really cool villain.
Oh
And
yeah.
when you start, you're already behind. Like, you've got
Yeah,
to
he's
catch
already
up.
he's already about halfway done. Yeah.
Yeah.
By the time you get going, he's like halfway done. And I mentioned this too, but it was one of the guys I met at North Texas, and he was, I was trying to get a pickle because I had been getting muscle cramps while I was there, probably some medication or something like
Yeah.
that. So I'm at the bar trying to get a pickle, and this guy's eating his dinner and having a drink, and he looks at my name tag and he goes, "Your name looks familiar. What did you write?" And I tell him, and he's like, "Oh man," and he starts going on about City of Brass, and so I laid it out for him. I was like, basically, my influences for City of Brass is Flash Gordon, because now, mind you, I also did like a year worth of research on pre-Islamic mythology, and I interviewed people from throughout the Middle East through the course of it because I'm like, listen, I don't want to offend your culture and your traditions. Do you know about this story? And they're like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We tell those stories to kids. It's all good. But they have their own versions of it because the English version is pretty much about 50% made up. The author of the traditional English version of the Arabian Nights was he heard some of those stories and then he went and wrote a novel loosely based on them. So I mean that's a thing. So I asked them, and I got some insight on like their beliefs in genies and the nature of that. And they said, there's people in Iceland and Ireland who believe in leprechauns and house elves and all this kind of stuff. It's no different than that. But Flash Gordon, save the world, Flash, save your planet, right?
That's such a
Uh,
good movie. For folks out there who haven't seen it, treat yourself. Do it.
yeah, yeah. And
Experience it.
Max von Sydow's version of Ming the Merciless is a
Oh,
perfect way to play your Sultan of Brass. Is just like, he's like, Clytus on board, pick a planet for me to pick apart. And then he's going to take the parts of that he likes and throw it into the plane of molten skies and expand his empire and build his godhood through sacrifices. So he's not technically a god, but he is a great power.
you
But
don't want to
he
cross him.
and he wants to be a greater God because then he's going to have infinite power. Then he can set the whole universe on fire if he feels like. So that's the
Yeah.
stakes you're at. And I love that high level stakes, high level play. The only way to beat him is to make friends and actually interact with the characters in the adventure. I don't tell you who you have to because that'd be a railroad. But I tell you, if you're going to play that campaign, you better be friends with somebody because it's going to be real hard, real fast. And then just kind of throwing in all of the different styles of things that I like. Scott Green and I spitball a lot of ideas with the original one. And then I just was like, some of these locations we created, I want to have a whole dungeon of it. I want to have the whole dungeon of it written up because we never did it before. So I got to go back and expand those locations. The Freeman's Tower, awesome. Drug dealing dark elves, you know, and yet they're good friends with the Sultan because, that's the whole dark elf thing. And I wrote it in a timeline where they don't really mess with the spider goddess because I assumed she'd been taken out in the 70s like my party did.
Yeah. Because you could do
Or
that.
early 80s.
Yeah.
Well, you can try.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't going to be easy,
Yeah,
but we
no,
come from
no,
the school
no.
of gaming where
Yeah.
it's not going to be easy, but if you pull it
Yeah.
off, feather
Yeah.
in your cap, like you
I'm going to
said.
mention my old buddy Joel. He passed about 2 years ago, but when we were kids, he got the backstab on Lowell with the black razor. So, he didn't kill her. He rolled bad, but he knocked her down from 66 to about 5 hit points, and then she killed him. He remembered that the last time I talked to him was about 3, 4 years ago. He's like, "Hey, remember that time I backstabbed Loth?" I'm like, "Who could forget?" He goes, "Remember when she smashed me against the ceiling of the room and just drug me along like a bug on the bottom of a shoe?" I was like, "Yeah, I remember that too." But yeah, good times, good times. So I'm
Sometimes
going
an
from
awesome death is worth the story,
oh
right?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
the stories, Like when we were talking about that character Ard, who was based on a player in my game, and he did betray the party at the very end and tried to take them out. But by then, one of our clerics was so powerful, he was basically indestructible. So somebody would die, and then the cleric would resurrect them, and someone else would die, and the cleric would raise dead them, and so on and so forth. So people are dropping and getting raised and dropping and getting raised, and the Sultan is raising his guys and they're getting dropped
Ah,
again. They're all casting things like implode and imprisonment and all of this stuff. It was just the craziest high level battle ever. When we did the third edition one, I had like 7 books open and 3 computers,
good
and
God.
it took us 2 game sessions to get all the way through. So
Now, talking about the maps
yeah,
and areas in City of Brass that,
right,
or I guess the Lost Lands, the Titian Islands.
yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Is that from Titian, the painter?
It's a color derived from copper.
Okay. So
So
it's a,
Copper Islands, but yeah, Titian, I'm an artist, so I was like, that's a cool name.
when
Yeah.
I was reading it and I saw Titian Islands, I was like, uh-huh, someone's a fan of Titian, which is a good
Yeah, oh
person to be a
yeah,
fan
oh yeah.
of.
I love art history, like we were talking about earlier, is one of my things that I actually did quite well in college. I had near the top score in Survey of Art History 1 and Survey of Art History 2, and those are the classes that make people drop out of art school.
Dang, dang.
Yeah, because they're
Wow.
they're hard. You have to know at the time you had to know the name of the artist, name of the piece, the era it was made, approximate year. If you had the exact year, you needed that. What style and movement it was. So it could be
Mm-hmm.
the Venus of Willendorf, right?
Mm-hmm.
Artist unknown.
And
40,000 BC, and where it was found, the whole deal. I mean, you had to know all that stuff. So they would put these slides up, 1 slide, 2 slides on the wall, and you're here with note cards and you're drawing a picture of it on one side and then writing all of the details as he's rattling it off on the back. Then we're going to the library, we're photocopying the pictures and we're gluing them to the back of the, making our own flashcards so that you would know that. And it was a lot of study, and that was like some of the hardest studying I've ever done, but it allows me to understand a lot of the art
yeah,
better.
and listening to you talk about the difficulty and what that was like, combined with earlier conversation,
Mhm.
reminds me what a blessed man I am because my wife both has a bachelor's in art history, and she's definitely one of those shield maidens you were talking about.
Yeah.
I got a tough.
All
All
right.
right, so when it comes to art, do
Yes.
you have a favorite style? And I'm not saying the other styles aren't great. I'm just saying, is there one that say you have the most of as a sign
Huh.
that you were most invested in this?
Like RPG art or like just art
Any.
in general.
Any art. And I
Um,
mean any type of art. It doesn't have to be drawing, painting, it could be architecture, just generally not like sonic art, like music,
right,
but some
right.
sort of visual art.
Yeah, I have some people that I really like. I mean, my personal favorite stuff of like classical antiquity, if you will, I can look at Caravaggio. Like I can look at Caravaggio's paintings all day long, every day. I don't know if you know about him, but he was a straight gangster. He was a absolute gangster. Michelangelo Caravaggio was a wild man. He like was raised in brothels, that kind of thing.
Nice.
He was an amazing tennis player and an accomplished fencer. And so one of his things, right, well, those brush strokes, there's a lot of commonality in the muscles and the tendons and fingers that you use. One of his things that he did was he would go to the tennis courts and he would snooker people for money. He would play bad and then double or nothing, triple or nothing, and then he would demolish them and absolutely they played with a leather ball with the feathers stuffed inside of it on clay courts, right? So he'd beat them, and then they would be angry, and then he would challenge them to a duel and kill them and take their money. So he ended up on the run several times in his life for murder in different cities that he had worked and operated in. He was the one who chiaroscuro, the light and dark. So I like that. Géricault and Delacroix both were painters for the French imperial court under Napoleon. You're talking the ones where you've got like the chevalier on his horse with his sword, and he's got the leopard skin on his saddle to designate his rank. That is the style of painting that was taught to Frank Frazetta. That was the technique and style. The other one, he did the shipwrecks and the sea scenes and things like that, but also painted like all the crazy people in his neighborhood and people at the mental institutions and things like that. So Delacroix, Géricault, I really dig that French impressionist, French expressionist, I guess. 1800s, 1780s. That stuff was really amazing. And then you got Wyeth and all of the illustrations he did for Treasure Island and books like that, and Knights of the Round Table. The old man Wyeth, he was the one who was the illustrator. His kids were more fine artists, but he was the one that was the illustrator, even though his illustrative technique is far above and superior to a lot of so-called fine art, right? It's interesting the differentiations that they make between the things. I also like Aubrey Beardsley, the stuff that he did, his illustrations for the Morte Arthur. They're all like the little woodcut kind of. Those are gorgeous. So I'm inspired by a lot of different art. I got to go to Dali Museum down in Tampa, and what an amazing thing. And then they had original prints of Goya's drawings that he did while he was in the asylum. His madness etchings, yeah, I think they might have been lithographs. So it was all of his lithographs that he did of the feelings and emotions he had while he was going through his first bout of syphilitic insanity.
Oh,
Okay.
that's a problem.
And
Yeah.
then, his later paintings are the ones, with like, Jupiter devouring his children, whatever, the black paintings, as they call them.
Cronus, I think it
Yeah,
was.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
black paintings. And those were painted in a home on the walls that he was in his last days. That stuff is wild to me. I also like Diego Velázquez. He was another one who was a court painter for the Spanish nobility. And I mean, talk about what a baller he was. He painted himself into the family portrait. You know what I mean?
It's amazing.
Tres Niñas, the three daughters. Okay. So
Yeah.
you have
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So you have the small people that are in the painting. They're there as nannies to the girls, and they brought these people in as servants for the children because they were the same size, but they were adults. And then you have Philip and Isabel, or I think, or Philip two, Philip three. One of them, King, is in the background, framed in the doorway.
Yep.
The king is framed in the doorway with his wife, watching the painting take place. The girl's doing her little thing with her dress. And then here's him in the painting with his paintbrush showing his mirror that he's looking in to get yeah, that stuff, that's genius stuff. I love that.
Great
I love
artists and being incredibly cocky tend to go together.
Right,
Absolutely.
right. And just trying to figure out how they did that. Modern guys, I've gotten to meet quite a few. I love Rick Sardina. I actually saw his work and introduced him to Necromancer Games, and he ended up doing covers for him for several years. I got the chance to have a cover. We got to license a cover from Brahm, and Jerry was awesome. Really super amicable guy. Got to license through Ellie Frazetta two of Frank's paintings for our Judges Guild stuff. So that's why we have those. We have the Eternal Champion with the guy on the horse, the Green Knight, Eternal Champion image. That we got the repaint, I believe. I don't think we got the original. I think we got the repaint. So when Frank had his stroke, he started painting with his opposite hand, and he would go into his museum and take paintings off the wall and back to the studio and work on them some more, which drove his kids absolutely crazy. But he's like, "Yeah, I never liked this one, and this is what the publisher wanted, and now I'm gonna make it the way I want it."
Who's going to tell me can't? He's Frank
And
Frazetta.
not to mention the fact that he was just as skilled, if not better, with his opposite hand after his stroke than he was with his regular hand. So,
I got a question for you
yes, sir.
because I posed this to my wife. I was trying to think, is Frank Frazetta arguably the greatest artist of the 20th century?
Of the 20th century, I mean, as far as his skill and technique and illustrative quality, I would say yes. As an actual artist who's inspiration and influence has helped shape culture and society? Maybe not, right? But that doesn't mean that he isn't any less important than any of the other ones, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, there's arguments that can be made, you know, well, Andy Warhol didn't paint his own stuff. Yeah, but he came up with the ideas for it and he kind of oversaw the thing. You know, some of the stuff you can love or hate whatever you think Banksy's political stances or views are, and he's still alive, so technically he branches 2 centuries. You know, Picasso started in the 1800s, but he lived until the 1970s, 1980s. He's pretty important.
Yeah, but he was garbage. I mean, his
Well,
stuff was
but he
terrible.
wasn't though. That's the fun thing with Picasso is
Uh,
his father was the maestro of the School of Art in Spain.
so
And look at Picasso's paintings that he did when he was 11 or 12 years old.
yeah, and he got worse as he went on.
He did, and like I said, he poisoned his own pool because he would scribble on a napkin and turn it over to a bartender in exchange for paying for his drinks. You know, he wasn't a great person. But I'll give you an example of this. Cubism. Cubism, he and George Braque helped invent it, and there is value in cubism. I'll give you an example. The guy who was the head of our graphic design and illustration department literally has written the books on camouflage and the history of camouflage. The guy's name is Roy Barons. He wrote these books. There's like two or three of them about where camouflage came from. The joke he tells is that George Braque and Pablo Picasso were sitting in a cafe on the border of Spain during the Spanish Civil War. And this was at a time when the Germans and the Soviets were driving across France, free train, right across France, bringing in tanks and airplanes and the whole 9 yards right across France, getting dropped off, and these are getting sold to the one side, and these are getting sold to the other. Well, supposedly some armored cars came rolling past, and they were painted in a camouflage pattern that the Germans were attempting to adopt at the time. And Casso and Brock both looked at it and they go, "They stole my idea." They turned around and looked at each other and said, "You stole my idea." You know, so, but Salvador Dali, I mean, his artwork is speaks volumes for itself. You know, so I mean, there are a lot of great artists that came out of the 20th century who, culturally, for whatever reason, I mean, Guernica is an important piece, whether it's any good or not.
Well, you mentioned the Dali Museum and being a resident of Florida. Unfortunately, Tampa
Mhm.
is still like 8 hours away, but that is definitely on our list to
Yeah, it's
go
amazing.
visit because we saw an exhibition of his in Atlanta about
Yeah.
10 years ago, and it was amazing. Dali, yeah, Dali. Okay,
Yeah,
I'll give you
he's
that one. Yeah.
traditionally talented and skilled, and they say that Picasso's big deal is he got bored. He was bored with doing all of the same thing, and he came up in a time when you had the bohemian thing, right? Because the bohemian lifestyle has well, there's another artist, and of course that's 19th century, but
Oh,
Toulouse-Lautrec. So when you look at my paintings from my concerts and things that I go to, those are really influenced by Toulouse-Lautrec because of how he painted the people in relation to like the gelatins that they would put over the lamps to cast color in the clubs while they were all getting blown out of their mind on laudanum and
absinthe.
absinthe. Yeah.
Yeah. Caravaggio.
Yeah.
I got to see a number of his originals when we went to Rome about
Yeah.
2 years ago at this point. I believe a number of those were in the collection of the Borgias, the Borgia Gallery.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
was associated with the Borgias, then yeah, that gangsta talk completely on point because the
Absolutely.
Borgias weren't good
Absolutely.
people, but boy, they had fantastic taste in art. That
Oh
thing is
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, oh yeah, and they paid for tons of it. One of the artists I use in class to try and teach them perspective and things like that is Raphael, right? Because you can tie in the whole Ninja Turtle thing. But when you show the School of Athens, it's kind of hard for some of these kids because they're 14, 15, they're not ready to hear this. But it's like all of the figures in this are models based on people this guy knew or had studied. And they're all allegorically representing people from a Greek era that was thousands of years before his time, over 1,000 years before his time. And he was saying we finally have achieved the level of intellect that they had in ancient Greek times,
And
during the golden age of Greece. And
the School of
so he paid,
Athens in person is a
yeah,
whole different experience than seeing it just in a picture. The Vatican's got a great collection.
Yeah.
And speaking of Raphael, I dropped in the chat one of the portraits that I took a picture of because there's a story that goes with it. So there's this portrait of a beautiful lady
Mm.
that we saw, and she's got her tits out. My wife instantly recognized her and said, "I got a story for you about this." So this chick was, if I remember right, Raphael's primary woman,
Girlfriend. Yeah, yeah.
his go-to, and they screwed so much that his patrons said, "Okay, y'all have to separate. You can't see
Because you're not
her
getting anything done.
anymore. You're not getting anything done." And so once they were separated, then he started going listless and trying to die of lack of inspiration. And they saw that this dude might actually die on us. So they said, "Okay, you go ahead and get back together." And then they just got to it so hard. And my wife makes the point, I don't know how true it is, but she makes the argument that it's theorized that she effed him to death. Like he
No,
died
that
early because they boink so hard.
I could yeah. The one thing that I know that is with him, I go, listen, all the artists after him were called Raphaelites. Everybody before him was called pre-Raphaelite. Everyone before him is
It's great.
pre-Raphaelite. Everyone. That's a whole world of people, tens of thousands of years of art. Everyone before him is pre-Raphaelite. Everything after. So that's pretty wild. So that's a feather in the cap. And because with the kids, I always show them the little cherubs that are at the bottom of his painting of the Madonna and Child. I'm like, a lot of you probably have this like in your bathroom or something like that. And I'm like, well, here's the whole painting. And then, you break it back and show them the whole thing, and they're like, that's pretty cool. And then you zoom into the clouds, and I'm like, now look at all the little baby faces in the clouds here. And they're like, whoa. So it's a way to get them to like kind of understand allegory, understand going for the big idea and making something that's more grandiose out of your art than just a picture of something. Because a picture of something doesn't necessarily make it a piece of artwork. And I tell people that all the time. Being technically skilled doesn't necessarily make you an artist. Basquiat, right? Basquiat wouldn't be considered technically skilled in a lot of his artwork. Some people find horrid and ugly, but if you like understand his childhood, where he grew up in Haiti, and the things that he's expressing and showing, it's a form of expressionism that it's brutal, shocking, but that's why it was painted and rendered that way because he was painting things that were like representative of like graffiti and things that people who had no training whatsoever were still putting on the walls in his hometown in Port-au-Prince when he was like a little kid before he came to New York. He would just give his work away until people finally recognized that he's actually reflecting the things that he's experiencing in his artwork. And so sometimes even if it isn't rendered in a traditional high polished Boris Vallejo way, it doesn't make it any less valuable as a work of art because it's all how those things hit you. I give an example, like a lot of people look at Mark Rothko and they're like, geez, another couple squares on the wall. What's the point? And I'm like, okay, let's go to the Nelson Atkins. They got one up there. We go to the Nelson Atkins. All right, cool. Look at that painting. Yeah, it's an orange cube and a green cube. Who cares? Right? I'm like, cool, keep looking at it. Yeah, they look at it, they look at it. Now look away. And it's still in your head. Okay. And so he painted those things that way because he's burning an imprint into your mind. And he doesn't care what the shape, the object, the thing is. He's doing science on you, and that's his art, right?
Yeah, but his art and the red dots and things like that, the
Yeah.
point of those is money laundering. It's not talent.
You're 100% correct. I feel that way about a lot of them. It's easy to pick on like Jeff Koons because he was going to Harvard or Yale or one of the big schools to get his business finance degree, and he was taking like art history on the side or whatever. And he's like, I have an idea. I'm going to come up with these like really goofy things. I'm going to make these super talented grad students craft them for me. I'm going to put them up and I'm going to convince my buddies who just graduated and got these jobs at Prudential and, whatnot. I'm going to get them to buy those and put them in the lobbies of their buildings or put them in the sculpture garden outside of their structure. And it's like, so if you ask me, like, what's my least favorite piece of artwork, the one where he floated the basketballs in the gelatin or whatever, I'm like, that doesn't do anything for me, you know. But on the other hand, I had one piece that's like I'm not really big on like performance art per se, you know.
Okay.
That's not really my, but I've seen some great performance art and I've seen some interesting things. One of them, there was a guy we had named Jeffrey Bird, who was one of our photo professors, young guy, and he was gay, and it was during the height of the AIDS thing. I mean, the AIDS thing went from the 80s to the 90s, right? And so he took like 1,000 shot glasses and filled them all with water, and then he put red food coloring in the ones that represented the amount of the population that was infected with HIV. So it was a piece of like display art, not like something you're gonna hang on your wall or put in your house or any kind of thing like that. It was a very powerful message to put that in people's heads that, like this is out of us, this is what's going on, right? So it's like not all of that stuff is great, but when it is great, it's fantastic. There was one we saw, installation piece in Colorado. It's like a 9-story building, and they've got like different art on all the different floors. And they have one of them. It's all like pre-Columbian art, Native American art, all that kind of stuff. So you got your natural history, plus you got your modern art, and it was a room. It was just a room, a big chamber, like a ballroom with a high ceiling, and it was absolutely dark in this room. And you walk into the room, it's completely dark, and there's like a hum, like this weird hum, and then there's an amber glow somewhere near the ground that is in a unlocatable area. Like you can't go there and find where this light is because you feel like you get
Interesting.
closer to it and it feels like it gets farther away. But when you get into the middle of that room with that little bit of an amber glow near the floor and this like electric buzz, you feel like you're floating in the middle of the room. You feel like you've crossed into another dimension. That is a kind of art that you can only experience by being there and being engulfed in it. You know what I mean?
That's
So
cool.
you can't put it in your room. You can't hang it on your wall.
No.
You can only experience it, and you can only experience it that way. And I think that's what's cool about like the Meow Wolf and those places, because they're doing these kind of installations that are completely like bonkers, but they're hiring and using these artists to create these things that then the public can go and enjoy and interact with in ways that they've never experienced art before. And that's what's going to save us from these cell phones, you know.
Hopefully.
Because well, you
Hopefully.
look at like I was talking to Darlene, the artist and cartographer at North Texas, and she and I are on the same page that it's like with the AI art, there's no soul to it. I had a guy I had to fire because he was copying other people's stuff, and so there's a bunch of pieces we paid for we can't use. He was basically going to ArtStation and typing up the things that I wanted him to do and finding one that was like it and then just completely redrawing it.
Screw you.
And
I could have just gone to ArtStation and bought the piece myself. Yeah.
right, right. And so,
Wow.
I mean, that's kind of the things you run into. Like, that's some of the stuff that I have to deal with when art directing. But when it comes down to that aspect of my gaming thing, there's people who really can tell a story. Whether their stuff looks like Frazetta doesn't matter to me. Whether it looks like Boris doesn't matter to me. That it is evocative of the tale that you're trying to tell, and that it's rendered well professionally. Those are important. So I've got a lot of guys that I work with, and they check that box. And girls, I mean, I say guys for everything all the time. I'm an equal opportunity employer when it comes to art. When you listen to the podcast, please don't send me a message saying, "Hey, look at my portfolio." Not because I don't want to, because I do really try to look at all of that stuff and write them a nice critique and whatever. However, we're a little bit slow because we're waiting for Wizards of the Coast to release their new books to find out what's going on. We have like 7 products on deck with Necromancer Games, plus Frog Guy Games, plus all the other companies that I do work with and art direct for all have things that we're just waiting to drop when we finally can, to find out what's going to happen, whether we need to change any rules, rewrite anything, all of that kind of stuff. So we're kind of stuck in that bubble right now. So yes, I would love to look at your portfolios. Yes, I would love to hire every single one of you that has awesome natural, well, not even natural. You worked hard. You worked hard. That's one of the things with talent. There's a segment like on 2020 or one of them shows years ago where they were talking about, or Dateline, where they were talking about the difference between talent and training. And it boils down to all talent is that you worked really, really hard at it and nobody paid attention while you were working hard to get good.
That's like the
Uh,
10,000 hour rule of if you do something for 10,000 hours, then you may
yeah,
be able to
yeah.
become an
And of
expert at it.
course, so they have these people who are like what they call their hit makers, right? Folks who are super famous right now, all of them, Britney Spears, Taylor Swift, all of them went and took vocal lessons from this same lady in some strip mall in the middle of nowhere. And her philosophy is all about failure and then correcting from the failure, learning from the fail to improve, you know. So it's not that practice makes perfect, it's practice makes better. So I have one of my artists, brilliant, genius, super talented, in my opinion, top five current working illustrators in the world. And he had heard that, oh, all of your best ideas, all of your best talent, all your best skills or whatever are all dried up by the time you're like 22 or 23. That, you're going to have your most creative period in this small window between like 17 and 22, 23. He names off all these physicists and mathematicians and all of this kind of stuff who came up with all of that kind of thing. And I was like, man, that's nonsense. He goes, what do you mean? I was like, well, I'm painting and drawing some of my best stuff now in my life, in my middle ages, as it were, where I've got, arthritis going in wrists and elbows and shoulders, and I can't work for as many hours as I could before, but I've learned so much and I've trained so much and I've worked with so many people that my compositions are better, my choice of colors is better, my renders are better, everything across the board is better. So just because you're awesome now doesn't mean you might not even be more awesome at some time in the future.
So, for the folks watching, I keep
Mhm.
looking over to the side because as he's been mentioning pieces and artists, I've been looking them up to see what this is.
Yeah.
And some of these Jeff Koons pieces, act, they're pretty good. I like
Yeah,
them.
he got
Yeah.
better as he went. I would say he started as a fraud and became an artist.
And that's a
The,
perfectly legit path.
and that's totally fine. And I feel the same way about my entire career in RPGs. So uh I'm 100% honest. I was in the right place at the right time, and I just I bit.
That works out.
Your window's only so big, and you can either go through it or stay home. And I went through, and here I am.
Yeah, showing up is the key ingredient of success because if you don't do
Yeah,
that, you don't get any of the rest of it.
yeah.
As
Well,
far as my own taste when it comes to art, I'm thinking that just for the, say, the painting, drawing field of it, Art Nouveau, I'm a big
Art
fan of
Nouveau is
that.
fantastic. Love it.
Mucha, Klimt,
Yeah, Gustav
and
Klimt stuff is so amazing.
yeah,
Aubrey Beardsley was in that period as well. He was.
one hallmark thing that me and the wife got to do was go to Prague to see the Slavic Epic by
Oh,
Alphonse Mucha. If you haven't heard of it out there,
mhm.
what it is, it's 20 paintings that are each 20 feet by 20 feet,
Oh
and
wow.
each one of which would be worthy of being like the celebrated national artwork of a country. This Czech dude churned out 20 of these things, and they are amazing.
Oh yeah. Have you?
Oh, and plus, both Klimt and Mucha love them some women. And so
Oh
I'm like,
yeah,
I
yeah,
can
yeah,
relate
yeah.
to these guys.
Yeah. Have you ever seen any of Grant Wood's pieces in person?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So they are on the verge of psychedelic in person because they're large, like you say, they're big, big pieces. And they're all of these like locales throughout Iowa of these, cornfields and bean fields and all of this kind of stuff. He's famous for the one with the old man and his slightly younger
American Gothic, I
American
think.
Gothic. That's the one that he's famous for. But man, that stuff. And now, when I was in at Northern Iowa, Gary Kelly was artist in residency, artist emeritus for the school because he graduated there. Gary Kelly designed the Super Bowl tickets for like 15 years. He had like the first
Oh,
15 years. Yeah. And
oh,
he was a student of the Grant Wood School. Okay. But he works in pastels. He did paintings for almost every issue of Playboy magazine. He did the lifestyle page.
I could tell
So
he liked
there,
women too.
there was the cocktail dress, the martini, the man in the tuxedo, cigarette
That
holder.
guy. Okay.
Yeah, he painted all those. He did his own version of Sleepy Hollow. While he did that one while I was in college, And my mentor, O.C. Johnson Jr., if anyone ever happens to know where he is right now, have him get a hold of me. I've got work for him. But OC is a technophile, or technophobe. He doesn't like any of the internet technology, cell phones, any of that kind of stuff. So it's hard to find any of his work, but I can tell you that you probably had know some kids who wore some sneakers back in the day that had like superheroes and all kinds of stuff on them, and he probably designed those shoes. There was those ugly balls that they used to sell for like $1 in a big jar at the Toys R Us. Those he designed most of those while he was
Oh,
art
okay.
professor. Yeah, he was an airbrush and mixed media artist. His particular technique was he could reproduce the same image over and over and over and over again, like
That's a that's a talent.
and really
Wow.
he was a surrealist, great guy. But he was friends with Gary, so we'd get to hang out with Gary Kelly in a non-professional setting and like go to his favorite Italian restaurant that he did the menus and the illustrated all the boards around here for, and
That's
you know,
cool.
go have a veal and some meatballs, you know. So yeah.
But for architectural art, well, and I'm also a big fan of iconography and
Mm,
mosaics in particular.
oh,
If
mosaics.
if you ever get a chance to, which politics makes a problem of it, but go to St. Petersburg, Russia, the church on the spilled blood. The thing is
Yeah,
just covered every inch with the amazing mosaics. And then, of course, the Hagia Sophia, I think is the most beautiful place in the world.
right.
But the Russians, they know how to do some art.
Yeah, and
Um,
they knew how to buy the art that was good. So yeah, I mean, they at one point in time owned most of Van Gogh's collection.
oh, okay.
Yeah,
Because the Hermitage Art Museum, it
yeah,
is a world-class art museum. I
yeah.
mean,
My wife's been to that. She got to go on a cultural exchange back when it was the Iron Curtain.
yeah,
So she went in like 1989,
there was like a
1988.
6 month window under Trump where it was cool to go. And I had to
Yeah,
fill out an intelligence dossier on myself and hand it to the Russians to get the visa, but made the wife happy. And it was an amazing trip. It was the cleanest city I've ever been in.
yeah, yeah,
It was wonderful. Food's fantastic. But anyway,
yeah,
uh,
yeah. Oh yeah, that's
oh, but you
my
mentioned Caravaggio. I want to tack back to him for a second
sure, sure.
because while we are in Rome, the series of paintings, the styles of paintings that my wife was most interested in were of Judith beheading Holofernes.
Yeah,
And I had to keep asking her, honey, is any of this directed this way? And she assured me that it's not. Now she went and
right.
bought a t-shirt with it on there. So if anything happens to me, y'all, here it is. It was premeditated.
That's funny.
And then I took a look at what have I actually bought as far as art, and it looks like Stephen Fabian is my guy because the variety and the intensity of the images that he made, just he was on point.
There are a lot of people who have just unimaginable skill and technique and things that just grab you and move you in so many ways, you know. I love the Chicago Art Institute, just watching the people take that corner into the room where the Seurat is and then just like hitting the wall because when you see it on TV or you see it in Ferris Bueller's Day Off and you see all these people just staring at it like that, they really do because it's 3D. It's because the pointillism messes with your head and you feel like you could just walk into that garden and have that day on that park,
Really?
you know. Yeah, I love that stuff. Yeah, that is really cool. But yeah, anytime you want to talk about art, I'm definitely open to talk about that. I'd like to talk a little bit real quick. Artists that I like working with, Mike Syragos. I always say it wrong and then he corrects me. Sid Quaid's this awesome, sweet, kind kid from Kansas City whose stuff looks like a lot of our favorite stuff from the old school AD&D books. He's great. He's got a lot of charm and personality in his work, a lot of stuff I enjoy. Hector Rodriguez, Hockleaf, he's awesome. He's a Chilean artist. If I need something done and I need it done like within a week, he's my guy. Quentin Sobrouillard, he's a Frenchman. He and Artem Shakayev, who was one of my students, have a very similar style. Artem's brilliant. So when you talk about the Russian thing, I already know when Artem comes into town, he makes Imperial Russian desserts and brings them over for Christmas. And we're talking like cakes and things that are impossible. And he just whips them up like no big deal. Brian LeBlanc is great. Faith Berger, she was one of my students. She did a lot of, she did the map for the Boys and Burrows that we did. And she's done a lot of Monsters 20. 20, I think.
Since you are a professional art director for at least one role-playing company, how many role-playing game companies are you art director for?
So Frog God Games, Necromancer Games. I do a lot of stuff for Game Hole Games, which is Alex Kammer's company. I'm credited in all of Planet X Games stuff as a creative consulting, as I guess a good way to put
There you
that.
go. Okay. So
So,
you're a good guy. You are well positioned to ask this question too.
sure.
One of the observations I've had with 5e is that the art is kind of listless. There's no threat. There's not much action. There's not much dynamism. And my firm opinion is that RPG art was better when there were more boobs in it, which we don't have in 5e. We have like a prohibition on boobs.
Yeah, it's I will tell you that's has to do with Walmart more than anything.
Really?
Yeah, Walmart, because if you want to get your beginner's guide in Target, your beginner set in Target, and I've been to Walmarts in other parts of the country where they actually have a whole section of D&D books of Wizards of the Coast products, but Hasbro's not going to go there anymore. I think the last time they had anything that was risque in any way, shape, or form was right as Peter Atkinson and those guys were on their way out, and they did the Book of Vile Darkness. That's been a challenge with RPGs, D&D, comics ever since the Wayback Machine. Satanic Panic in the late 70s through the 80s made it so that if there were breasts or whatever that were readily available to be viewed by a young person, someone under 18 years old, the local DA could decide to put your comic book proprietor in prison.
Oh, son of a.
So it's still that way in some parts of the country. To this day, you're going to have somebody who's an activist, attorney,
Mm,
prosecutor who's looking to get reelected on
want some cheap
being
points.
tough on porn or whatever, then they're going to go pick on D&D and comics and stuff because in some parts of the country, the religious thing is what it is. In my opinion, I've kind of developed, I've watched this really long documentary. It was actually a college course about the history of the occult and things like that. I've come to a pretty firm conclusion that human beings have been really good at bullshitting each other for a long time. And I don't think RPGs and D&D is actually a new thing at all. I think that a lot of our cults, organizations, secret societies were really just guys getting together because they'd roll their dice, they had their cast their bones, draw a card, all those kind of things, and then they would make up some kind of story and basically bet your life on it, right? And it just seems to me that a lot of that stuff there's a certain amount of fiction mixed in with some ancient tradition, religion, whatever you want to call it, from different periods in time. But the class is called the History of the Occult, I think,
Hmm.
Mysteries of the Occult, and it's on the Great College Courses channel that you can get on Amazon or whatever. I watched the whole thing, and the guy, his history is his doctorate degree is in researching espionage and all of these different spy organizations going all the way back into like the 16 1700s were all tied with different secret societies, cults, and organizations, and a lot of cult leaders, occult, which means hidden, that's all it means, is hidden knowledge, hidden language, whatever, all had some toe in the spy game. Aleister
Huh.
Crowley was an asset of MI6 for the entirety of his life. He always thought of himself as like, I may be this, that, and the other thing, but deep down he was an English nobleman. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but for the state of modern RPG art,
yeah, yeah.
I do lament for it because when I was coming up in it, the 80s through about the mid
Yeah.
90s, you had the greats like Larry Elmore, Jeff Easley, Keith Parkinson,
Right.
Clyde
Amazing.
Caldwell, all just churning out amazing stuff,
Sure.
tits all over the place. Like
Yeah.
I got on my wall a print of House on Griffin Hill, like a
Yeah. Yeah.
module, and
Great
it's just
example. Yeah.
I could hear the hair metal blaring
Oh yeah,
whenever I
yeah,
look
yeah.
at it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Clyde Caldwell had that, he had that vibe to his artwork. It was very metal, it was very White Snake video,
Yeah, that's
uh
it. White Snake. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's kind of a cool little thing they had. And things were a little more open and free in, our society. So it's always like the clash of the sides, well, we want all of this stuff that some would consider, lewd, obscene, what have you. We want all the obscenity out there for everyone to enjoy. And then we've got the other extreme is zero obscenity. And in fact, I see your ankle and I'm going to write you up. It's pendulum swing, and eventually it'll swing back the other way. But as far as like getting stocked in Walmart in the South with an RPG book, that's not going to happen probably ever. Though I get some ads that pop up on my social media feed for things that are sold on Walmart.com that I don't know that Walmart.com knows that they're selling, because they're kind of shocking and lewd, if you put it mildly. I saw a decanter shaped like an
Oh,
organ. Yeah.
ooh. But just very briefly, when I
Yeah.
lived right next to Portland for just shy of 2 years, and they have strong laws protecting obscenity. If you're in public and didn't want to see obscenity, you were fine. If you wanted to see obscenity, there are places you go and see obscenity.
There you
And
go.
so, like, I went to a strip club here not that long ago in Pensacola, and man, I could tell a difference between everything's gone and we have to put this stuff on. I'm like, we're in a private place.
Yeah.
There's age check at the door. Why does anybody else get a say in
Yeah.
me seeing a starfish or not? But anyway,
Right.
back
Right.
to the artists.
Yes. Yes.
It seemed like Keith Parkinson was probably the best one of the group, and
He,
it's
he, he
too bad he was also the one that died the soonest.
Yeah, the cancer. Larry Elmore has told me that the only thing they could figure out, because Keith was a good boy, didn't really drink, didn't really smoke, was a healthy looking guy. He was tall, thin when I met him a couple years before he passed. Great looking, healthy looking guy, and then
You
he
got to
just
meet
took.
him. That's awesome.
Yeah, my very first Gen Con, actually. So it'd be like 2001, something like that. Yeah, that summer of 2001 was the very first Gen Con that I went to. And then we had September 11th, and everything was crazy from that point on. So he was a great guy, amicable. And they said the only thing they could think was that he was cleaning his leg with terpenol, or he would wipe his brush on his pant leg, on the towel that he kept on his jeans. And that stuff just soaks right into your skin, and it's full of forever chemicals. So it's same kind of deal happened with Frazetta, where there was a point towards before he had his first stroke where they thought he was going crazy. They thought he was losing his mind because he was having struggles talking, struggles doing things. He was, so they take him to neurologists and psychologists and all of this kind of stuff. Of course, the psychologist looks at his artwork and is like, clearly this guy is losing his mind. And so they were getting ready to institutionalize him, and his wife's like, wait a minute, I don't think this is right. So they went and got a second opinion and found out that his thyroid had been poisoned by terpenols. And the only thing he could think of was that he had purchased some cheap off the shelf turpentine instead of the good quality stuff he'd been using for years. And because he was in a hurry to get this piece done and he ran out, and that just breathing those fumes in over time in a not as ventilated an area as is used to, and it just poisoned his thyroid. So they shot a thing into the thyroid to kill it and had it removed and put him on thyroid medication. And he had a miraculous recovery. So
Wow.
I
So
caution my students against using oil paints, though one of my former students, who's now a colleague, they hired him because I taught him, I guess. So Bin Wen, great guy. He's going to be a famous portrait artist one of these days. He started painting with walnut oils and things like that that aren't made from like your pine turpentine, things of that nature. So a lot less hazardous, but I really encourage people to paint in a ventilated area, glove up. And even if you're using acrylics, you got to be careful not to eat it, because it's a polymer that's got formaldehyde in it to keep it from drying too fast. That's what keeps it liquid in the tube. The formaldehyde evaporates and then it dries. So that's acrylic paint. So don't eat it. But so that means
listen,
get it on
kids,
your
don't
fingers.
eat paint.
Don't eat paint. Yeah, it's pretty. They've been telling us that since we were kids. Don't eat the paint. It's full of lead, right? So yeah, you got to be careful with the materials that you use. It's really important to be safe. Be careful with whatever thing you're using, even if it says artist AP approved, which means it's generally safe to use. Is safe to use as directed. It's not safe to smear this oil paint all over your fingers and scoop it on a wall. I've got a couple paintings that I've done. In fact, one of the paintings that I sent you of the band Soundgarden playing in 1995, 96 actually has cadmium paint on it. It's one of my last couple of oil paintings that well, I mean, in 96, I have another one that I sent you, Taking Witch. That was one of the last ones I did in oils. And I've since transitioned to acrylic paint, which people, complain, oh, it doesn't have the same whatever, it doesn't have the same look, same technique. But wonderful thing being able to work with all of these awesome professional artists. Brian LeBlanc also quit working with oil paints many years ago, and he works with acrylic. So we've been able to kind of share some techniques and things. He will paint and then he'll let it dry and then he'll spray it with clear spray, let that dry, and then paint on top of that if he has any mistakes or any things he needs to like dry out faster or do whatever. And I started because of my friendship with the guys from Reaper Miniatures and their painters, I show them some of the stuff that my wife and I painted. She's far better mini painter than I am. And they're like, yeah, man, you want to just get some tints and things like this, just mix your paint with some mopping glow. And so I'm like, really? And so I used it on the miniatures and I got awesome results on the miniatures. And I'm like, I wonder if I can do this on a canvas. And I do. And it worked great. So it's given me that ability to create glazes, to create layers of texture that you can normally only get it with oil in a much safer environment. And let's be honest, Mopping Glow has a nice fragrance to it. So my paintings smell kind of floral and lovely.
What's wrong with
So
that?
yeah,
So we almost lost Frazetta,
yeah,
and we may have lost one of the best fancy artists that's ever been
right,
to their own medium.
right.
Oh my
So when you
God.
talk to Larry Elmore, he painted in a barn. He had a big, huge barn, fully ventilated, and yeah, and he'd wear the rubber gloves and things like that for many years, just yeah, keep it off your skin because that's a sponge. It's and you look at your hand under a
Yeah,
microscope, it's a sponge. Like when I was in college, our Ferdinand Ricardo Jose Echeverria, who was my painting teacher, Fergie,
that's a
and he was,
Spaniard.
yeah, he's descended from like Spaniards that established New Orleans, and yeah, and he was great, but he would give us, that's how I got that cadmium paint, it hadn't been produced. It's, whenever he's like, wear your gloves, don't get it on your hands because your hands are sponges. But he'd give us the old paint and things. He'd buy it like estate sales and stuff like that. One of our classmates, he ran out of paint thinner and he grabbed some stuff that he thought was thinner out of Fergie's painting locker and poured it into his turpentine, and the combination chemicals filled our whole art studio, filled the whole building at Northern Iowa, the art building with deathly chemicals. Yeah, the
Like would
stuff
kill
that they,
people.
yeah, like they use in executions, like gas chamber executions. Yeah.
And he just did it by accident because
By
he didn't
accident,
know. Oh my
he
God.
had to get checked out by paramedics. They approved him and said he was okay, because whatever, he passed whatever their minimum tests were. But then we watched him ride his bike off to go home, and he hit like every curb on the way. So we're like, "Are you sure he's okay?" But so then we got to have the actual OSHA guys, like the real OSHA people, not just having your watch the video, sign off on it type deal. We had to have the actual occupational safety hazards people who were assigned to Northern Iowa came in, and we had to sit in the lecture hall and get a 2 hour class on how not to poison ourselves.
Well,
Yeah.
good. I'm glad they came in handy somewhere. And
Yeah.
is cadmium radioactive?
It's yeah, probably. It's one of the heavy metals.
Okay, so it's toxic. All right.
Yeah,
Got at least
absolutely
that.
toxic. Yeah. Think of how the
Wow.
guys in the Middle Ages and the made that paint. Not but like Renaissance, how they late Renaissance and more modern era, how they made that paint by hand. There's some great films I've seen about like guys who make forgeries. They have to make the paint in the same way that the paint was made back then, using the same metals and minerals that were mixed together, and they have to be authentic to the time and date they were made. So this in this one, the guy was like melting down toy soldiers from like the 1850s to make paint with. He was using whale oil to pour it into a lamp to get lamp black, and puts it in a lamp and then puts a glass over top of it and then scrapes that into his linseed oil to make his lamp black colors and stuff for him to perform this forgery. so that it would be able to pass the chemical test if they decided to take a piece of it and run it through a spectrometer.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and people do that. We were talking about Caravaggio. There's a bunch of his paintings that were stolen, and then there's forgeries of his paintings, and there's all of these like big Interpol got involved kind of thing. So that's pretty wild when you think about something like that. Most art theft nowadays is related to, or art torture, I guess, is usually, like vandalism. The vandalism is usually related to people with environmental causes or some kind of thing like that, picking away the wrong thing to do, but whatever. Hey, they just made all those other pieces more valuable. So I guess, what have you.
Yeah, it must be nice to have the backing of rich elites that are enabling you to commit crimes. That,
Right.
like, if
Or
you or I did that, like, if
just,
I saw
oh,
a Jackson
I
Pollock
just can't
and
imagine
went
the level
after
of
it,
crazy on that. It's like when you had ISIS go in and destroy all of those tombs of these ancient knights, dudes who were like Saladin's paladins, literally,
yeah,
and then just dynamite their tombs because they practiced a different form of the same thing.
yeah, and how the Taliban took out the giant Buddha, amongst other things.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
When human beings decide that our shared cultural heritage is meaningless and worthless, that's a pretty sad time to be alive. That's as an artist and as someone who appreciates the arts, that's one of the most heartbreaking things you can have. Because a lot of the paintings are just falling apart all on their own. We don't see Greek paintings because they didn't have a concept of any. Their sculptures, most of those got melted down and made into cannons. They made them out of bronze, and the Romans made them out of stone, copied their bronzes in stone. But, they melted down all of the statues into cannonballs. Paintings didn't have archival longevity, so we don't know what most of their paintings look like, but we know from the writing that they were every bit as apt and talented as any of your late Renaissance painters were. They would practice trompe l'oeil, which is, faking the eye with the realism on one another by like painting a spiders or flies on the wall of their studio where they were training and learning. And then they'd laugh when the guys would go and try and smack the bug on the wall, but it was just a painting that they did. So we know
Wow.
that they had exceptional skill. We know they had canvases, but canvas only lasts for so long. And the fact that we have any of it now that is still existent is testament to how valued the rest of culture has made that art, that they've thought it was something that was worth keeping and keeping safe for as long as possible.
As I spoke about the Vatican earlier on,
Yeah.
whatever you think about the Catholic Church, the Vatican, if they get a hold of your piece of art, they are going to preserve it
Yeah.
because they've got all kinds of pagan things that you wouldn't
You're
think
never gonna
Christianity would
see.
approve
Yeah.
of, but
Yeah.
they keep it and it's still there. So there's that value. And I think the oldest surviving depiction of Jesus is in a monastery in the Sinai desert that has a permission slip from Muhammad to be left alone. And that's why they haven't been raided and torched
Right.
again and again and again. And it's really impressive. The quality of the painting is very lifelike. So if that's the oldest depiction of him, I figure, okay, that's probably it. And it's in a
Yeah.
desert, so it's
Yeah.
dry.
Dry. Yeah.
That helps preserve it.
That
But
helped a lot of the Egyptian stuff. Yeah, for sure. Well,
mhm.
then they talk about a lot of the statuary and stuff was also garishly painted. Which you don't think about that. Now, when we get our, concepts like a Greek army or whatever, it's from some movie or what have you. For most of us, it was probably Time Bandits, right?
That's a good one.
You get the idea of Sean Connery's. That was actually pretty decent, realistic depiction of like Greek life or Macedonian life in that era and that time when they went and did the spectrum analysis of the paint residue on some of these stone sculptures and things that they found around Athens. And wow, and these are some electrified colors. Like if you would have seen them in real life, it would have looked like something out of like a late 80s shopping mall, something you got at Benetton, like real
Yeah,
bright and loud.
it was only within like the past 7 years or so that I found that out that they had these things just painted up all tacky
They
and
put clothes
garish.
on them too. Yeah.
And I'm thinking maybe this slightly degraded representation of what they had is the better way, or at least am I the problem or
Yeah.
did they have
Well,
bad taste?
and
Like
a lot of the sculptural nudes that they had, since we're talking on the breast area, right? So a lot
the
of the
best
sculptural
area.
representation of the nudes, they actually put clothes on them.
Huh.
They would put
Really?
an outfit, sew the outfit onto the statue. So that was just one of the other things that they would do. Yeah, they had the appreciation of the nude body, but they also felt that their artwork was so lifelike that it deserved to be dressed out like a real person. So that's where you get the whole Pygmalion story and all of that stuff from. He makes a statue that comes alive because he's such a fantastic artist.
Ah, it's all making more sense. See, talking to art historians is amazing. It's awesome.
Well, thank you.
Well, you have to know everything about it. You got to know the society, you got to know the techniques, you got to know the chemicals, you got to know the materials, you
Oh
got to
yeah.
know
Oh yeah.
what light conditions it's supposed to be viewed under, everything.
One of my
Um,
daughter's friends, yeah, she's actually going that route. She got her art degree, which I was like, don't do that. But which is funny. I tell a lot of my artists, and a lot of the artists that I hire actually they had me, and then maybe a year or two at a junior college kind of thing, just to get their associate's credential. But I'm just like, you can learn with all of the things that we have now. You can learn everything you need to know technique wise. But if you want to learn the art history and learn the cultural impact and learn the why of a lot of the stuff, like why do we draw it like that? Why is this composition this? Then getting some formal training is good for sure, especially when it comes to color theory, composition, those kind of things. But they're not going to show you technique in college usually. That's like they expect you to put your time in to develop the technique. I don't know what's changed in the last 24, 25 years, but that's the way it was 30 years ago when I was in college. I can't speak to if that's still the truth now, but my daughter, she's a pretty talented artist, and I'm like, marketing, yeah, and maybe 3D modeling and rendering. She's like, yeah, that actually sounds pretty good because that way you can always do your art. You can always do your art. You're always going to improve. You're always going to get better. You're always going to learn because it's a lifelong thing. Once you fall in love with art, you're going to be in love with it for the rest of your life.
all right, so now we're going to get into some more standardized personal questions. Though you are the first one to get this question, what is your favorite alcoholic beverage and why?
I'm a fan of Scotch, Scotchity Scotch, just like Anchorman. I can't afford like the super high-end stuff, but I do have a great palate for it. So I'll go through a lot of the affordable brands, the affordable bottles that are in like that $40 to $90 price range. If it's a Balvenie, I'll pay more, for something like that. But maybe, like Christmas, birthday, that kind of deal. So I've
Special
kind of
occasions, then
and
no
I will
suit.
say that I don't like to give out the names of some of my favorites because they've only got this many barrels, which means there's only going to be this much product every year, and that amount gets smaller and smaller as the years go by.
Yep.
I'll give you an example. They had one called the Deverin, and it was I want to say Macduff Distillery, which from Shakespeare, right? Macduff
Hmm.
was not from a woman born, but from her womb ripped. And they had a couple of really good expressions that they were releasing, but they were mostly a distillery that was producing blends for like your high-end blends, your Chivas and stuff like that. So
Speaking of repackaging, and you mentioned Scotchy McScotch Scotch, did you have some of the Ron Burgundy brand Scotch that came out as a tie-in for Anchorman 2?
I did not get any of that, but
I did it. I did.
was
I
it
took the
good?
plunge,
Was
and
it all
it
right?
tasted a lot like Johnny Walker Red, which is fine by me. And it
It
even came in a bottle that looked just like a Johnny Walker
It very well
Red
could have
bottle.
been. Which one was it that was doing was it Johnny Walker also did the Fire and Ice ones and the other
Yep.
ones for the yeah, for the Game of
Yeah.
Thrones. And one of my buddies, he was really mad when they quit. They only did a certain bottling of it, and he went and he got a bunch of them for like cheap because they weren't necessarily taken off. And he's like, "Well, I've only got like a bottle of it left, and it was really good."
Well, then you drink it. You don't hoard it. To the
Yeah,
people out
yeah.
there that have big Scotch collections, and I knew a dude in New
Oh,
Hampshire,
yeah.
he probably had $50,000 worth of Scotch in a single cabinet. Drink it. It's meant to be drank. Share it
Right?
with someone that you
Well,
like, or just share it with yourself, but don't
it's
let it
not
just
gonna
sit there.
get it's not gonna get better while it's sitting in the bottle.
No,
Yeah.
aging's
My
over.
my grandfather was given a bottle of Old Granddad on the day I was born by one of his coworkers, and so we were gonna crack it open when I turned 18, but then they changed the drinking age to 21, so we had to wait till 21. By the time we opened that up and had it, it kind of tasted a lot like turpentine at that point. So yeah, we ended up
That's
in
too
dumping.
bad.
Yeah, it's something it just spoiled.
Because old
So
granddad's got a weird name, but it's actually pretty good.
that was not good. And yeah, I'd known enough about that sort of thing by the time I was 21 to know that it was putrid. So
Sorry to hear that.
yeah,
And since you don't want to give away the secrets of the best drinks
right.
that you want, I'm too poor to afford my favorite one, the Dalmore 20-year-old.
That's an
So
amazing one. Yeah.
y'all, if y'all can afford it, you can have it. That's
Yeah.
fine. But while I'm getting by with my working man's wages, Spayburn, I like that one. It's got quite a bit of
Favorite
flavor.
is good. In fact, our local shop has it's not an aged expression, which means it's under 10 years old, right? So it's like 6 years, it has to be 6 years old. You've got the Spayburn 10, which is a real popular, real smooth one, almost too smooth in my opinion, but I like it a lot. They have one that is it's the same hooch as the Spayburn 10, but it's aged in bourbon barrels. It's got kind of a real that kind of hickory oak bite into it. Got that charred wood added to it, but it's not like a peated flavor where you get that peated smoke. It's got that kind of that bourbon sizzle to it. So that one's pretty good. So their bourbon barrel expression, if you can find it, they only released it to certain liquor stores in various regions, and it's kind of one of those things where because they still have a lot of it over at the store by me, and the price is not bad. So yeah, it's kind of nice. Like if you're it makes a good Manhattan, which would be a Rob Roy because it's Scotch, but because it's got that nice, smooth, mellow Speyside flavor, but it's also got that just that little crispness that the bourbon puts in it. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and then Johnny Walker Red, nothing wrong with that. It'll get me
Yeah,
by.
it'll
Always
work.
affordable.
That's made from a lot of like Midland and Lowland Scotch type thing. I don't mind it. I actually kind of Johnny Walker Red was the one that introduced us to the game, so to speak.
The gateway Scotch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the black label's got a little bit more of a toffee kind of thing to it. I will go so far as say here's a good one that's kind of being widely accepted, and they've made a, pretty decent documentary about Scotch that's on Amazon. It's the Brookladdick Classic Laddie. That's on Islay. It comes in this beautiful blue bottle. They've kind of streamlined the bottle a little bit. They used to give it to you in a canister inside of a box and a bottle and the whole deal. And now they're down to just the bottle for that particular expression because they have a 10-year they've finally had it long enough that they can release their 10-year. And so, they're making more of the blue bottle. That's the one that's their main mix all the time. But Islay is known for the real peated, heavy, smoky, salty, real strong. Some people describe it's kind of like a charred log that you put a bunch of lighter fluid on and then flicked a couple band-aids on and lit it on fire and blew it out and then just kind of wafted that smoke into your whiskey. But
Yeah, it
and
checks out.
that's yeah, or like Lafroig or Lafroig, but they say it's like licking Lafroig, It's like, but I don't hate it either. I mean, I kind of like this, the alkaline and it's not always my go-to to have like a real heavily peated smoky scotch, but I'm not afraid of it, because as I tell people, I'm a real man. Uh, but, uh, ah, but,
A real man. I drank Everclear straight. All right, get on my level.
yeah. Smokehead is pretty good. Not too terribly expensive for the same kind of vibe. Their Port Charlotte, which is the same Brookladdish fellas, that's their smoky version. So that's their heavily peated one. But this classic laddie is smooth. It's 50% alcohol, so it's got more bite to it, but it's still very, very smooth. It is unpeated, made with the local barley that they've been growing there, bought from a specific farm, from a specific farmer, and it tastes like cinnamon raisin toast, buttered cinnamon raisin toast. It is just
All right, you
smooth.
sold me. I'm going to check it
Yeah,
out.
so good.
And
And it's about $60 a bottle. So I mean, it's in that if you're getting good scotch at the start of the good scotch price range, I guess. Yeah.
yeah,
So
treat yourself.
yeah,
That's in the price
but
range of
it's
that.
got that cinnamon sugar, just warm flavor to it. It's almost more like a Highland one because Highlands tend to have a little bit more of a cinnamon punch to them. See, that's why the thing, people drink Scotch and their first experience is something like Cutty Sark or Dewar's, which is all like kind of a lowland Campbellton area, kind of Scotch and whatnot. And there's nothing wrong with it. It got popular because it was the only thing they could get their hands on during Prohibition, right? But the whole history of Scotch is because the Scottish couldn't get brandy from the French because of naval blockade by the English.
That explains things.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
because they love them some claret and
Yeah, yeah.
other French alcohols. Oh, that makes so much
Right,
sense.
right. And then
And the
the
timelines add
Irish,
up.
yeah, and the Irish before they were, making that, they were making poutine. It's not like the mash, it's not like
It's
the
not
fries
like
with
the
the
cheese
gravy.
curds on
Yeah,
fries
no, this
poutine.
one
It's a
was
different poutine.
and I know I'm murdering the thing, but it was like they're like an Everclear kind of deal that they were making out.
Ah,
And so it's like it's always been illegal. So even if you have the recipe and now that they have the legal right to make it, it's still not the real thing if you buy it from a store. You can only get it from somebody who makes it themselves kind of deal. So
not shine if you're paying
but
taxes.
that's where the song, Old Mountain Dew, right?
Yeah.
Started as an Irish folk song, and that's what they're talking about. So they took that distilling process across the channel back and forth, and so like the Irish, they don't theirs isn't dried with peat. It isn't done that way, and it's got to be distilled like 3 to 6 times, and then it's Irish whiskey, right? And they age it for their 3 years or whatever it is, and that's why those whiskeys have the flavors and tastes that they do, and then Scotch, the whole tradition of using other barrels to mature their whiskey in just goes to what was being imported from the Americas into Great Britain.
So if
And
you know and enjoy this
um,
much about whiskey, why don't you come to the North Texas whiskey tastings?
here's my thing. Despite all of those different little bits of trivial pursuit knowledge I have, I am just absolutely a Luddite when it comes to signing up for and registering for anything. Gary gets frustrated with me. He's like the nicest. Gary Oliver is one of the nicest people you ever meet in your life, and I think he wants to choke me to death half the time because I can't even figure out how to create and enter my own games correctly. So it'll set
Dude,
me up. Yeah,
you ain't new to the game.
I've been there for 12, 15 years, something like that. But yeah, I'm not good at that particular thing. It's like I need a personal assistant to just handle all of my bookings and all of that kind of stuff because that's not where my mind is working. I mean,
Okay, well, for next North Texas that I've already got my badge for, if you want me to put in your events, I will. You just got to make sure I
yeah,
have a
I
seat
mean,
there.
my day to day is thinking about creatures in other planets and other dimensions, their ecology and the topography of the world that they live in, and food chain and all of that kind of. So I'm working on that kind of deep tree nonsense.
You
But
set up
yeah,
this segue perfectly because the next standard question is
sure.
if you got shunted out of this reality,
Mhm.
you're gone and you're you don't transform, you get dropped into some specific movie, literary genre, whatever kind of setting you want, and you don't get to come back. You can't cheap
Yeah.
out on this. Which would it be and why?
Okay, so that one, I thought about that and I had a different answer, but as you spoke it out loud to me, it dawns on me that the ideal place for me would be Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom because I would be such a beast on Barsoom.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah.
You don't even have to be that great of a fighter to be better than them because you're going to be 10 times as strong as they are. The reason Superman could leap tall buildings in a single bound was because John Carter could.
I
That's
never
it.
thought of
That's
it
it.
put that way.
Yeah, 17 whatever, 1907 was it? Princess of Mars, that predates Superman by like at least a decade.
Wow.
Think of it, all of the things that Buck Rogers could do, all of the things that Flash Gordon could do, they did them because John Carter could do them.
So
Uh,
everybody really did just rip off
they
ERB,
completely
and
ripped
that's
off. Yeah. Edgar Rice Burroughs, I would love for them to do a movie about his early life and all the just the crazy stuff he got up to.
yeah.
People don't realize he ran away from home, and his dad, I wouldn't say he was affluent, but his dad was a business owner. He owned like a five and dime. He was a successful businessman. And this kid ran away from home when he was young and joined the army and lied about his age and was in a part of a posse that was going to try and track down Geronimo when his old man figured out where he was and demanded that the Department of the Army return him home because his mother was apoplectic.
Dude, if you talk to Chris Holmes about ERB,
No, no.
you
What's that?
totally need to then
Yeah, yeah,
because he has researched that dude. That was one of the main topics of discussion
yeah,
we had when we
yeah,
did an interview was
yeah,
all about ERB. That dude lived
yeah.
a life.
He did. And he never thought he was a successful writer. He thought writing was just something that he did to make the money because he was still determined to be a successful businessman no matter what. That's why he bought that huge ranch out in California and named it after Tarzan with the money that he made off of his first check for a Hollywood movie. Now,
Yeah.
Tarzana, California is named that because of Edgar Rice Burroughs,
Oh, really?
because he had to
That
sell
makes
off the
sense.
land over time because he wasn't successful as an orange grower. That guy he was in the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Yep. He was a war correspondent, and he wasn't young either when
Yeah,
he
no, he
signed up
was
to be a
old.
war correspondent.
He'd been run off by his wife at the time, partying too hard. But
Oh, and
yeah,
you couldn't
yeah,
leave your wife alone around him either. He'd steal her.
that's what I heard, which is wild. Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Dude
I've
had
seen
game.
pictures of him, and he's just a normal guy. Yeah,
So
yeah.
Barsoom, that's a good one.
Barsoom would be great. Yeah.
So me personally, I'm split. I'm of two minds. One, it's either high risk, high reward, go for your Forgotten Realms, like high fantasy thing, because if you're successful, the multiverse is open to you. You can experience anything you want, but you could also get crapped out by an orc, which is bad. But if I want to play the safer route, I'm thinking like period romance, Jane Austen novels, things
Oh
like
yeah, yeah,
that,
yeah.
because it's close enough to modern era to where the most basic forms of our modern conveniences, I could get by in that world.
Right,
And then
right.
just think in those stories, I'm a former Army officer. I went and served in the Near East as part of a colonial venture. And I've got this longing for this woman that no one's ever seen or met. And so when the younger women are like, why won't you know me? And I'm like, my heart belongs to another in another time and another world. You know, like my story
Yeah,
is
yeah,
set.
yeah.
But my wife's smarter than both of us. She said, Anne of Green Gables,
Mm.
because the worst thing that ever happens there is, oh no, someone knocked over the apple cart. She just gets to play with pets and
Yeah, oh
farm
yeah.
and pick apples. And oh, all the girls decided we're going to put freckles on ourselves this summer. That kind,
Right.
she's tuned into something there.
Yeah, yeah. It's just that simple life would be kind of, I like the idea of some action adventure though. That's
Yeah, yeah.
because you think, maybe the Hyborian age, and then you're like, yeah, and then you get a scratch and you're just gonna get an infection and they'll cut your leg off and then you're gonna be eaten by wolves.
But Barsoom, good choice. There's
Yeah, yeah.
plenty of color, plenty of things to do.
Like
And
seem to have like a dramatic healing properties on the planet as well. He'd have 1,000 cuts on his body after a fight against 100 swordsmen, and then a couple days later, it's all healed. Everything's cool. He just drank the milk of a thoat, and it healed him. Who doesn't want
now
some thoat cheese, right?
I'm adventurous when it comes to cheese.
Yeah.
Why not? Yeah.
Uh,
All right. Next question.
yeah.
What is your favorite movie of all time? And if you can't do one, top three, and
Oh
why?
man, even the top three is tough. I'm actually I'm a big cinephile. I watch a lot of movies, and I mean I watch them deep. I watch them several times. Uh, that's a hard one. I just watched The Godfather like this week, one and two. I don't really cut into three all that much because it's so bad. But it did give us a fantastic director by the time it was all said and done because Sofia Coppola makes some pretty amazing movies. Man, I watch Excalibur every year on Easter because I read the Mort d'Arthur, I read T.H. White's Once and Future King, and the great thing about reading that is he'll get to a battle or an important moment in the history of Arthur, and he'll go, just go read Mallory right now, and then come back after you finish that chapter. He does a better job of telling it than I ever could. But Excalibur is awesome because on the spiritual level, the quest of the Grail is in the stories. It's a time of new beginnings. So I watch it every Easter because Easter time, Christmas time, New Year's. That's usually the feasts where some supernatural being would walk into the court of Arthur and say, "This is the quest that I offer to your knights to prove their valor and their worth, or whatever." And it's all allegorical. It's about a time, where there was the transition from the old ways, the old gods, the old faiths to adopting Christianity and that kind of thing. So there's just so much going on in that movie. So I'll probably go with that one. I really
That's a
did
great
like
choice.
Arnold's Conan the Barbarian, though I will say it's a great call movie. It's a terrible Conan movie, but as a call movie, it's awesome. Thulsa Doom
Wow.
was an enemy of call. Yeah,
I
it's
have never considered that.
and then they made that terrible Hour of the Dragon movie and called it Call the Conqueror with Kevin Sorbo. So yeah, it is what it is. But it was like it was an accurately bad representation of Hour of the Dragon.
Man, you're hitting me with perspectives I never considered before.
Yeah.
You're probably a good teacher, I'm guessing. I don't know, maybe, maybe.
Uh, it's we're always learning and honing our craft. This last few years we've had to try and figure out how to teach people who think and react and interact with the world in a completely different way than anyone ever has before. It was kind of getting that way to begin with, but it's we're here. We're in this cyber age, if you will. We're at the beginning of cyberpunk, really.
Yeah, and now I see why everybody in cyberpunk settings are miserable because of the bullshit that comes with it. But I'm very glad that you picked a John Boorman movie as at least your
Oh yeah,
tentative go-to because of
yeah.
any director that I've seen him succeed at most often creating an entirely different world to
Yes,
move you into
yes.
that you kind of feel cut off from the world you're in if you're in the headspace of this place, of this movie.
And
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 he's
that's that
beautiful.
whole the British Isles. It's always kind of an undercurrent of all of the different cultures that develop there, that there's the shining realm that's just on the other side of the reality that they live in. And what do they say? Everything that's good and kind is brighter and shinier in the shining world, but everything that is dark and evil is wrapped in shadow. And that's just their descriptions of the fairylands and the things in the past that you could end up. That's kind of cool.
It is also fortuitous that you mentioned that one because, I've done a number of these interviews, and so I've already given what my favorite movie is. Currently, it's Man Who Killed Don Quixote, but time will tell if it's going to stay that or if it's going to
Right.
be Gilliam's Adventures of Baron Munchausen, because
I
I've
love
seen
Barry
that
Munchausen. Yeah.
probably more than any other movie, except for maybe Rocky Horror Picture Show. But that's a whole different reason. But it's a great movie. But Borman, another movie that he did, let me know if you've seen it, The Emerald Jungle.
Emerald Forest, yeah.
Oh yeah, Emerald Forest. And I just
Yeah.
looked it up. Screw me. Yeah, The Emerald Forest.
Yeah, where he's trying to find his son that gets taken because he's part
Yeah.
of a expedition that's cutting down the jungle.
John Borman drops Powers Booth in a jungle and then says, "Go find your
Oh, yeah.
son," basically, and that the
Powers
movie's
Booth was
about
such a
that.
strong actor. It's like his scenes always have gravity. You're drawn to his words, his deeds, whatever he does, regardless if he's a good guy, bad guy, in between. When he was the senator in Sin City, one of his last roles, really, because he was, I think, pretty ill at the time when he did that movie, and he's like, wow, this guy is really putting it across as a terrible, evil guy who cares not a bit.
Yeah, he
Actually, I think he
chewed
did
those
both of
scenes
the.
up.
Yeah, yeah, both of the. He was the best part of the Dame to Kill for the film version of it. Really,
That's another one of those Emerald Forest that so much of it feels like you've kind of gone through a portal to a different place, even though
absolutely.
these are places you could go in this world. And it wasn't far from where Powers Booth character went on his day to
Right,
day,
right.
but he might as well have been in a different dimension and being able to show different lives, different types of lifestyle,
Apocalypse Now
cultures.
has that vibe as well, where you're not really on the earth anymore. They're in hell. That's absolutely. They cross that river, they're on the river Styx and they're traveling to hell. You get to that stage where everything is like ultra surreal, and you get to that stage pretty quick. You get to the point where they're surfing. Everything from that point on is just absolute madness. It's outside of being a war movie, it's in all of the themes that Francis Ford Coppola was trying to bring in for that vibe of the Vietnam War and all of that sort of thing. And then and then of course it being based on the book The Heart of Darkness, but it's just that surreal quality that it goes into. You can tell he's losing his mind, and so is everyone else that was making that film. I don't know if you've seen the documentary that I believe is what has everyone in that family won an Academy Award already? At least one.
That's
I
a good question.
think so. Roman, his son, writes and produces a lot of things, and he produces Sophia. She's one.
And his
Was it
Nick's one. Yeah, he leaving Las
Big Fish?
Vegas.
Yeah,
Nick
yeah, yeah,
one for
yeah.
that. Oh, that's such
He's
a
their
good movie.
nephew. Yeah, that's
Oh
it's
man,
wild. Yeah.
a romance movie for the broken people in the world. Such a good
Oh
film.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And he always gives like 10,000% no matter what. I love Mandy. That movie, I've watched that probably 5 or 10 times. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
that's
on our it's Halloween, which starts in August in this house. So it's on our Halloween rotation.
Yeah, when I first saw Mandy, my wife didn't want to watch it with me because she wasn't, it didn't look like something she was interested in. So I went and watched it and finished and went upstairs and told her, "You need to watch this." And she said, "Okay, I'll do it tomorrow," because we trust each other's taste generally.
Oh
And I was
yeah.
upstairs gaming. She was downstairs watching it, and she finished up, came right upstairs and said, "You were right." I was like, "You're damn right I did," or
Yeah,
"Damn right I
man.
was." Because, oh, that movie hit so hard. The dude who plays the villain, it was also in
Mhm.
the series Vikings. He was great in it.
Yeah,
He's
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
loathsome.
That director is the son of the director of Tombstone.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Panos Cos.
Yeah, Panos Cosmatos. He did what ended up being my favorite one of those Guillermo del Toro Cabinet of Curiosities episodes. Even though the very end of it was a minor letdown, everything up until the very like the last 30 seconds was prime. It was like his when he Beyond the Black Rainbow. It had that kind of vibe to it. You get Peter Weller and a bunch of other up and coming actors, put them in a room, and they're all like, this person's the physicist, and this person's the author, and this person's the music producer, and all that kind of thing. That episode was really, really cool. I enjoyed that. I think the best out of that entire series because I know a lot of people. Dreams in the Witch House was not the same as the H.P. Lovecraft one. The ones that they did that were based on H.P. Lovecraft, but then they went ahead and did exactly what everyone else that does, that they make something that's based on H.P. Lovecraft, and which was completely make up their own nonsense. Uh, and that's been true ever since they started making movies based on his stuff, which
You mentioned Lovecraft. Have you seen it's a new movie, Suitable Flesh, with Heather Graham?
yes, yes, that one was
W-
pretty good. It was
I
pretty good.
thought that was solid.
My favorite part of that movie is that they filmed it as if they had filmed it in 1987 or 1988 with the same kind of film stock and camera angles that they would have used in Reanimator. If you watch it, they could have made it look like movies that come out today with no problem. All of that stuff is just filters that you can run in Adobe Premiere.
Mm.
And they chose to make it look like a movie that was made a long time ago. And one of the things that I'm really enjoying about a lot of the low budget films and these new filmmakers that are coming up is that they are guys who are like 30, what are they, 35 to 40 years old, something in because they're finally in Hollywood long enough, they've done enough commercials or TV episodes that they get their chance or whatever. And they're making these movies that look like the movies that inspired them to make the movies in the first place. And I mean, like, to the letter. Everything in it is exactly.
Well, it was supposed to be a Stuart Gordon movie, but
Yeah,
unfortunately he passed. But
yeah,
his
yeah,
fan and I guess understudy Joe Lynch, younger guy, came
yeah.
in and did it, just knocked it out of the friggin'
Oh
park.
yeah, yeah. That
And
was as close as you're gonna get to one of Lovecraft stories. I felt.
and I'm deeply grateful that while the movie took a long time to actually get made, it
Mhm.
waited till now so we could get all that nude Heather Graham. I mean, she's a good actress and she
Yeah,
just rocked that part. And of course, I like seeing this. There was so much good
yeah,
about that movie.
yeah.
And you're right
That was
that
wild.
the younger guys trying to do creative things. That's a big part of enjoying cinema for me, particularly like B movies or movies that
Right.
aren't as polished. So long as I can see the creative spark and the
Yeah.
passion, I can enjoy it. My wife, if it doesn't have the production value, she doesn't care.
Right.
Now, if it's people crying and committing suicide in the rain in France, then she's for it, but whatever. So, yeah, there's some good stuff going on in there.
Yeah, I've been rewatching a lot of Tarantino's movies. I've read a couple of his books recently. Actually, Levi Combs, Planet X Games, he gave me a copy of Cinema Speculation for 1 year, a couple of years ago, and I get busy, so I don't get a chance to sit and read for joy that often. But I read quite a bit of it. I also read his novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I love. My daughter, all 3 hours and whatever minutes of it that is out there. My daughter and I went and saw that in the theater twice. We went like 2 days in a row to catch it again, because there's
Wow.
just so much. What a great movie about friendship. Everybody thinks it's like
Yeah.
they all go, oh, it's about the Manson thing and all of this kind of thing and that. No, it's just two buds being buds in 1969 Hollywood.
That was
Yeah,
my takeaway. Like, I could just watch hours and hours of Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio just broing off of each other.
just interacting and
It
drinking
was
margaritas.
cozy.
And, yeah,
Yeah. And then he got to beat up some Manson followers,
Yeah,
which
and
that's just
change
cherry on
history or
top.
whatever. Yeah, I felt that that was actually the one that Leo kind of got robbed on his Academy Award for more than a lot of other ones, because that performance he gives in his trailer where he's losing his mind is a 8 goddamn whiskey sours. I started quoting that to Levi, and that's why he gave me that book, and that's why I'm listed as 8GDWS in all of his products because it's like the inside joke because we both love that movie so much.
So what you got coming up soon? What can people find of the products you're going to be putting out soon?
Oh yeah, Tome of Essential Horrors is our second book that's going for OSE fans. We really want to help that fan base out. We love them. We love their product. They're giving us some love in return, so hopefully that does pretty well. For in general, we support your system. We did step off from Pathfinder because a lot of everyone else did too. Sales kind of fell off over time. It's an older system at this stage. It's hard to believe, but it is. It's over a decade old, right?
And so if people want to get in touch with you, where's the
Yeah.
best place to go find you? Or do you want them to find you? Do you want them to leave you alone?
Yeah, actually my Dirty Bob's Roadhouse page on Facebook is probably one of the best places, or I can't even remember what my Instagram is, but go find Necromancer Games or Frog God Games or Planet X Games. They've tagged me so many times that you should be able to find me there. Those would be pretty good places to find me, I guess. Like I said, I don't do a lot of interviews. I don't do a lot of that stuff, so
Links will be in the description. Well, Casey, I appreciate it. And I hope
absolutely.
you have a great day. It's been a
Hey,
blast hanging out with you.
thank you. I've had a great time.
Now, wasn't that interesting? I told you that was going to be interesting. The only problem we ran into in our conversation was that we had too much to talk about, that we had to eventually call it quits at some point. That's not to say we won't have another interview in the future, but we both have wives and jobs and stuff like that we had to get off and do. And one of the things we both had to go do was get to work on future gaming products. We actually did this interview back in July over a couple days because, again, we had a lot to talk about. But Casey was on summer break from his high school job and had game products to work on, and I was busy editing game products for other people. And because of all the cool folks I get to talk to on this channel, I've been swamped with editing and writing of RPG material myself. And so while there's a bunch of hubbub about a new edition of Dungeons and Dragons coming out, I want to encourage you to patronize independent creators like Frog God Games, like Casey Christofferson, like the other great independent creators that we talk to on this channel. And if the stuff I'm working on sounds interesting to you, check that out as well. Because whatever flavor of the month Hasbro happens to be chasing may or may not be your cup of tea, but these independent creators, they are the leaders in the hobby. They are the people that keep the community of role-playing game enthusiasts going. And if you're watching this channel, you're probably in that community, and if you're not already, welcome on in. So what is it that we talked about that most interested you? Was there a particular type of booze we talked about that really struck a chord in your imagination? Was there a role-playing game or artist that you want to know more about, or you have comments and thoughts of your own to share? Please drop those in the comments below. I read them all, I interact with them all, and I appreciate them all. And if you did have a good time, I hope you like and subscribe. Share this around to your friends because I talk to interesting people that I don't feel get enough coverage in the broader RPG conversation. So make these people better known. We all have important parts to play. So my dear friends, I've enjoyed our time together. And though we part for now, I wish you nothing but the best.